This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. Did you miss me? It was only a week. But anyway, thank you. That's so sweet. Thank you, of course, to Lewis Goodall for doing such a wonderful job while I enjoyed some much needed... I went to the Peak District. Have you ever been to the Peak District? Beautiful part of the world. Two things about it. It's my favourite accent in England. It's been somewhat polluted in recent years by 30p Lee, so it's nice to have the accent reclaimed by all the delightful people that we came across. Second thing, I'd never seen a hill before. Hang on, let me finish this sentence. I'd never seen a hill before that was so steep that walkers had cut footholes. Have you ever seen that? Walkers had cut steps into it simply by the act of walk. So you've got a very steep hill heading towards a stile, for example. So everybody has to take the same route up the hill. That's crucial to what I'm describing. You walk in such a way, because it's so steep, that you actually cut like homemade, human-made steps over years into the side of the hill. I apologise if you don't find that kind of thing interesting. I find it absolutely fascinating, and it was a lovely thing. And then I found a cricket pitch. So we got like in the middle. I would Stanton something. I'll get the message now telling me exactly where it is. So we're going through. I nearly had a heart attack. One of these hills was so steep. And then we cut through some woodland, and I was trying to do it all on my phone instead of using an Ordnance Survey map on day one. So we got a bit lost, and I found a trail back and cut through a bit that wasn't, I don't think, an official footpath. And then we just came out of a woods, heading towards some standing stones, the 9 ladies standing stones. And we just came around a corner. It's a blooming great cricket pitch in the middle of the Peak District. There must be the only flat bit for miles around. And in what I thought was a wonderfully English tradition. A beautifully English tradition. And Welsh, I suppose. Don't get cross with me in Scotland. You're not big on cricket. An absolutely beautiful cricket pitch, carefully tended, and probably the only flat bit of. I thought, God, that's England. That's where I could start singing Jerusalem at this point in my holiday. It was anyway. Well, yeah, there you go. That's the sound of my holiday. Peace of mind, just drifting off there. Bye, lovely holiday memories. Bye, peacefulness. Bye, calmness. Bye. Low blood pressure, bye all of those things that happen when I'm on holiday. Bye odd, bucolic, patriotic moments. Stanton by Dale, I think that's close to it. But there it goes. I'm waving goodbye now to all of that because we've got to wade straight back into politics. And we're going to begin with a funny one. We're going to begin with the continuing efforts, which I could be wrong, and I don't want to be rude. But I say I don't want to be rude. Give me 10 minutes. Let the holiday. Let the holiday calmness slowly dissolve. I'll be rude again by 20 past. But it's all a bit desperate, isn't it? Do you know that they put together fairly conclusive polling on the issues that the voters most care about? And, I mean, spoiler alert, this is from fieldwork that was done in between the 27th and the 29th of May 2024. If the cost of living gets 55%, or I beg your pardon, 55 points on this measure, the debate about transgender people scores 1. And that tells you an awful lot about what is going on in this election campaign at the moment. It's week 2, isn't it, effectively? So it hasn't settled yet. There hasn't been any like massive moments. There haven't been any debates. There's a debate tomorrow night. That's usually, I feel, where the race proper begins. Thank you, Connor. No, I didn't do any fast catamaran racing while I was away. I'm not made of such strong and robust stuff. I was hoping to do some motorcycling, but unfortunately it was far too hilly. So no. What was the other thing? Fast catamaran racing. What was the other thing? Eleanor, what was the other thing? Skydiving. No, I didn't do any skydiving either. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Steve Baker. Hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker. So it hasn't really got nasty yet, despite the efforts of some contenders to make things nasty. And the fact that the Secretary of State for Business this morning has been touring the studios talking about toilets suggests that this election is going to be a very odd one, that these election campaigns are going to be strange ones, not least because, and I always say to you that you can tell often what the salience of a subject is by looking at the switchboard at a place like LBC and finding that the cost of living gets 55 points on what you care most about. And the debate about transgender people gets 1 point, tallies entirely with my experiences of those conversations, although we may have an associated conversation later in the programme. I haven't decided yet on our 12 o'clock topic. But our 10 o'clock topic is private schools and Labour's continuing intention to put VAT essentially on school fees. A school that announced it was closing in April is the latest to claim that it's a direct consequence of the Labour Party policy. And it was down to 40 pupils at that point. I think it had 160 before the pandemic. It was down to 40 now. But of course, if you phone up the Daily Mail and say, could we pretend that, or if the Daily Mail phone you and say, could we say that this is a direct consequence of Labour's policy, then they're going to bite your arm off. I knew I shouldn't have said that about cricket in Scotland. You know, as the words came out of my mouth, I thought to myself, can't you get to the first break? Can't you get to the first break of the week without actually offending? So Scotland has a huge cricket attendance, says David. Paul says, oh dear, James, cricket not a thing in Scotland. This is the West of Scotland cricket ground. I once owned the top floor flat. He's sending me pictures of cricket grounds. I take it back. I take it all back. I take it all back. Don't cancel me. Cricket Scotland, do not cancel me, all right? I've not been back at work for 10 minutes yet. So why is this debate so febrile? It seems blindingly obvious to me that being able to pay for your child's education is a way of it, which is why I do it. It's a way of ensuring that your child has advantages that are denied to everybody else. I love the way that some people try to claim it's the politics of envy. So here I am, right? I went to public school. My children go to private school. I think they should be abolished. I'm going to get banned from the PTA, aren't I? There go the coffee morning invitation straight out the window. That's Cricket Scotland and fellow private education parents that I've managed to alienate so far this morning. But I genuinely believe that my position is the only logical one, and in some ways the only moral one. Let me explain. There is no earthly way that I am going to allow the children of Jacob Rees-Mogg or King Charles to enjoy even more advantages over my children than they were born with, if I can afford to claw some of them back. My late father taught me this, which I should warn you may involve a little bit of emotion as I recall some of the reasoning that he shared with me later in life, because I used to debate at public school for the abolition of public schools, and I still would, and I think it is the opposite of hypocrisy. The reason I mention all of this is because you can't accuse me of the politics of envy. It is actually ridiculous. One of the best ways for the ruling classes to keep the plebs in their place is to accuse them of the politics of envy. Because do you know what happens next? The plebs start accusing each other of the politics of envy. And by plebs, I mean people like me. You may not put yourself in that category. But imagine if I was doing this for a living and I was accusing you of the politics of envy because you want a more fair society. You want a more equal society. You become part of the problem. It's the politics of envy. It can't be the politics of envy with me because I both benefit from it and I buy it for my own children. So what is it with me? It's definitely not hypocrisy because I'm being completely honest about the fact that it's unfair. So how can anybody hold a different opinion? If you can afford it, I think you have an almost moral responsibility to pay for it, to give your children the best possible education that they can have. I think that if you want to look at it historically and socially, if you don't do it and you can afford it, then you leave the top of the pyramid even tinier than it is already. But that doesn't mean that you think it should exist. That doesn't mean that you think it is a good thing. It's just a necessary evil, if you like, if you want to give your children advantages that they would otherwise be denied. So 13 minutes after 10 is the time. The question becomes quite complex now because I'd bet my house on everything I've just said. All right? Everything. But if this policy makes the number of children accessing private education even smaller than it is already, does that actually create more unfairness in society as a whole or less? I don't know the answer to this. Let's use round numbers. I think the exact figure is about 7%, but let's say 10 and 5. By the way, I think it's a bit of a non-story in terms of the number of people that are not going to be going to private school now because of the extra 20% increase in school fees. The reason for that is that the price of school fees has gone through the bloody roof in recent years, and no one has complained about the exodus of British children from schools like mine are becoming finishing schools for oligarchs. I think they've been warning for the children of oligarchs, Chinese, Russian pupils. The price of the top public schools is now utterly, utterly prohibitive. So it's a bit of a non-story. Private schools have been closing at a rate of knots. One round the corner from me in Chiswick closed last year. Had absolutely nothing to do with Labour policies, but that's what they will pretend. The bit I don't know for sure, the bit where I think there might be a chink in the armour of my smug, self-satisfied certainty, is where you currently have 10% of children going to private school. If 5% go, does that make society more fair or less fair? 0345 6060 973. Because I'm not sure. I think that the fewer people enjoy an unfair advantage, the fairer society is. But if it was my children being squeezed out of the 10% because it's being culled down to 5%, I would probably not feel the same way. What if it gets up to 49%? If 49% of people are getting an advantage, does it cease to be unfair? 50%, 52% of people can afford a better education than the other 48% of the country. Of course, the Brexit results suggest that would be the other way round. But if 52% of people were better educated than 48%, would that still be an unfair advantage? Absolute equality of opportunity educationally is impossible. Do you know why? Because if you abolish private schools tomorrow, they would open up little tuition hubs at tea time. And they already exist, of course. You can see them on your average high street, maths help and homework clubs. So people would be able to pay, even if all children had identical access to identical schools, parents would immediately start paying for extra tuition, extra coaching, extra school. So money would automatically become a player in the process. But the figures would be lower. People would be able to get advantage for less. Until you remember that some people will put their children in after-school clubs and put their children in weekend schools and put their children through more hoops than you can shake a stick at. So immediately it's like that old line, isn't it? If you took all the money in the world and divided it by the number of people in the world and shared it out equally, by the end of the first day, you'd have people with nothing and people who were already rich. That's just the nature. Some people would gamble, some people would steal, some people would sell, some people would buy. It would automatically have broken out. So that's question number one. 10:17 is the time. I won't take much more on this. Question number one, what's more fair? An education where 10%, a system where 10% of children can buy advantage, or a system where 5% of children can buy advantage? Hit those numbers now, you will get through. Whatever your background, whatever your attitude, you may never have thought of it like this before, but that's question number one, 0345 6060 973. Question number two, I don't think I've ever asked you before. How does this look to other countries? Because private education on this sort of scale, certainly in Europe, is rare. I knew a Swedish girl at university who went to, I think, the only private school in Sweden. It was reserved almost exclusively for the children of diplomats. The idea that you've got 100 children and 10 of them have already been born 2-0 up, and then their parents can write a cheque and make sure that they're 4-0 up by the time the half-time whistle blows. What does that look like to other countries, to people from other countries? 0345 6060 973. Mike says, what about parents who can afford private school but choose not to? They don't really come into this conversation unless they're doing it for reasons of genuine principle, like Alistair Campbell and Fiona Miller. And that is where my position does begin to look a little bit hypocritical, because You could, but that would involve sacrificing what I see to be my children's opportunities and futures upon the altar of my own political ideals. And I can make a fairly strong argument for that not being fair. And then people need to earn a lot of money after going to private school, writes Andrew, in order to pay for their therapy, which I think is a very good opener, actually, for a conversation that we won't be having today, but which we have had in the past. So there it is. What does the British private school system look like to people from outside Britain? 03456060973. And does making it even more exclusive, financially excluding, does that make the country fairer or less fair? Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. In case you think that I sort of unfairly malign right-wing media, particularly the Daily Mail, in these sort of issues, then happily I'll be joined later this hour by Dan Needle, the tax expert who sort of blew the doors off Nadeem Zahawi's arrangements. He's had a proper look at what the Mail has claimed about 4 in 10 people ready to quit private school because of the Labour policy. And I'll warn you now, it is... it's pretty uncomfortable listening for anybody who has used that as the foundation for their own opinions on this issue. But enough from me. Does it get more unfair if you limit access to unfairness to fewer people? Adam's in Bracknell. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, hi there, James. Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
You're most welcome.
I just called up because I went to private school as a kid, and then my parents lost their money and we ended up in state school. So I've kind of experienced both sides of the fence.
Yeah.
And the gulf between the two is immeasurable. It's such a big difference. And I feel that what Labour's doing, I think it's disingenuous, is that they're actually just creating a more elite class in society. So they're going to basically squeeze out the middle class who can't afford the private education anymore, and then that's just going to create an even bigger gulf, pretty much what you're saying.
But when does that become... I don't want to talk myself out of a topic, Adam, by repeatedly saying I don't actually believe that the numbers are going to be anywhere near big enough to make the kind of scenario that this entire phone-in is based on, which is why I'm not talking to Dan Needle until the end of the hour, because he kind of drives a coach and horses through everything we're talking about, which is why we're talking in the realms of principle and theory. So
yeah.
What if it's 1%? What if it's only 1% that can access? What if the number is so small that in a way it doesn't matter? What if it becomes like owning a stately home?
Yeah, I mean, what my view is that if Labour were genuine about trying to kind of separate this gulf in society, they would actually go for banning all private education schools completely.
Yes.
And then if you want to get a better education, then you can hire a tutor after hours. This means that people from elitism backgrounds will be mixing with people from, more poor backgrounds.
Yes.
It will get rid of the divide in this class society that we have in Britain that you just don't seem to have.
Well, it wouldn't get rid of it. It would, because what you'd have to do, you'd have to have some sort of, you'd have to start introducing an extra payment on houses that are in the catchment areas of the best state schools, wouldn't you? Because you'd still, I've always thought it's just as unfair, in quotes, to have a 20% premium on a house in the catchment area for a brilliant grammar school where you don't pay fees, just as, quotes, unfair as it is to pay that money over the course of 10 years to send your child to a fee-paying school. It closes it down. But if we see that as perfect, in your view, and actually in mine as well, politically speaking, just talk me through why reducing the number of people that can access the unfair advantage somehow increases unfairness, when I think logic and possibly even statistics would suggest that the fewer people have access to it, the more general fairness there is in society.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't subscribe to that thought. I feel that if you've got something that gives people an edge over others in society, and then you make that harder to obtain for the majority of people, that means the people that can obtain that are just going to be more elite than they were before.
So if 51% of the population can attain it, then it's really, really fair.
Yeah, I mean, it is fair, but I just feel that everybody should be on a fair ground, and there shouldn't be any. I don't think either of us
can win this conversation, hands down, because it doesn't make sense, does it, to say that if you've got a sum total of fairness in society, right? So like a pie of fairness, if the slice of pie being taken out by the people who are enjoying an unfair advantage gets smaller, then you've got more fairness pie left than you would have if the slice of pie being taken out was bigger.
But I think that the Labour's view on this is disingenuous. I think Keir Starmer.
Well, I know that's your point, and I know that's the drum you want
and
to
I'm
thump.
a Labour voter.
No, I know,
well,
and that's absolutely fine. But there's no earthly way Keir Starmer is going to come out in the current political climate and call for the overall abolition of private schools, which is why I think you're being a little bit disingenuous when you deny the kind of possibility that you're letting perfect be the enemy of the good. If you've got a problem with private schools, then surely reducing the number of people that goes to private schools is progress.
I just don't see it that way. I see it as you're making it more difficult for people. Therefore, it's going to be even bigger gulf between the people that can and the people that can't.
Yeah. The top of the pyramid gets even smaller than it was already. But the pyramid. The rest of the pyramid gets bigger, which I guess you can actually argue this both ways. And we have, for which I thank you, Adam. Can anyone actually go definitive on this and actually nail down whether or not society as a whole gets fairer or unfairer if you reduce the number of people buying an unfair advantage? Toby's in Southampton. Toby, what would you like to say?
I think it becomes a bit more unfair, and I think your previous caller talking about elitism and the elite going to private school. Now, I send my son to private school. I cannot afford, through my salary for my job, I can't afford to send him to private school. But before I got married, I owned a property, which I keep. And when I moved in with my wife, I rent it out. Every single penny of that goes straight from the tenant, essentially, to the school. Right? Yeah. So when Keir Starmer comes in and whacks on another 20%, I will no longer be able to afford the private school. Now, the reason why I chose private school is because of our son. We wanted a very small class because of the nature of what he's like, versus the state school around the corner, which is much, much larger, and he would be overwhelmed with that. So the one form entry private school that we've got, that was perfect for him. But suddenly, to not being able to afford that, and also you've got...
But you know, immediately, Toby, I have to point out the army of young children with comparable or identical conditions or situations to your son whose dad doesn't have a rental property or a tenant effectively paying the school fees. And the bigger that pool gets, then the more pressure is put upon the state system to provide better care and better provision. So 10 to 15%. So making the number of children who need support from the state increases the need for the state to step in and do something.
But if you've got roughly 10 to 15%, what I reckon, of kids that will no longer be, or parents will no longer be able to afford to send their kids to private school.
Well, you know the fees have gone up by...
Where are they going to go?
Well, hang on. Fees have gone up by way more than 20% over the last 10 years.
Well, mine have gone up by about 5 in the last 5 years. We've been sending them. But if there's a sudden jump of 20% overnight...
well, number one, I don't think there will be. I don't think schools will do that. They'll absorb some of the costs themselves. But number two, this argument is, with respect, I know, and this isn't your fault because I've heard it being made by people who should know better, but it's a silly argument to claim that the state system won't be able to cope. State schools are actually declining in numbers. Our demographics are in such a mess that schools are closing, particularly in cities. I don't know what Southampton's like, but there are schools, state schools are closing because they don't have the pupil numbers. But that will never make the front page of the Daily Mail for reasons that I'll leave you to speculate on.
So, but if you've got, let's say you've got 15% of parents that can no longer...
it's a made-up number, it's a made-up number, but I'll run with it.
Okay, so I'm only saying that because of people within the governors of a couple of schools that I know. They said that. Yeah. So they're going to go to a state system that currently is struggling, and I understand that. But where is suddenly this extra money going to come in immediately? How's it going to be phased in by, Keir Starmer?
That's for him to explain, but it's got absolutely nothing to do with my question this morning about fairness and unfairness. So that's two callers.
Making it more unfair. Yeah, that is my personal view.
Of course, it's your personal view, and you've been very honest about why. But if you were listening to this as the father of a child who would benefit enormously from going to a school like the one your child goes to, but you actually can't afford it, you wouldn't feel this way.
I appreciate that, and I know a lot of people might think that everyone. I think I get the feeling a lot of people think that private school is all like Eton.
No, not at all. Not at all. So I mean, in fact, the ones that are most vulnerable to this policy will be the ones that are least like Eton.
Yeah, which is a bit like the one that I send my son to.
He gets better care, gets more attention than he would do in the state system. You pay for it, and my parents were very similar to yours. You go without things, and no one's expecting the tiny violins to be broken out at this point in proceedings. But you don't go on holidays as fancy as some of your friends or your colleagues on a similar scratch who don't send their children to a comparable school. You don't drive the cars that you might drive if you had the money going in different directions. But I am afraid I'm going to need more persuading that reducing the number of people enjoying an unfair advantage makes that advantage even more unfair than it was when more people had it. I think that's finally the correct syntax for describing the principle that we're examining. Toby, good luck, and I hope you can hang in there. I mean, for obvious reasons. 10:32 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. I've done pretty well. I've allowed myself half an hour before going down this route, which I find incredibly amusing. And I don't know whether you've noticed it before, but people who ordinarily find it very difficult to accept that financial difficulty exists in our society, despite the cost of living crisis, despite the appalling distribution of wealth in this country, despite Liz Truss having 49 days in Downing Street, despite people like Rishi Sunak making huge sums of money from essentially betting, there is still a sense, they're very carefully fostered by right-wing media, there is still a sense that people complaining, not even complaining, tragically, people describing poverty or even people describing struggle must be either lying or entirely responsible for their own plight. I think perhaps the ugliest example is hygiene poverty, where people report that they can't afford something as basic as soap or shampoo. And what you do if you are, I don't know quite what word I'm looking for, but if you are very keen to make them feel even worse than they do already, then you might go online and find soap for sale in Asda for 15p. And you go, how can anybody not have 15p to spend on a bar of soap? But of course, the answer is very simple. Some people, by the time they reach the end of the month, or 2, 3, 4 days before the end of the month, have got nothing left. I do not understand, the older I get, why some people find this so hard to grasp. You actually are on zero or less than zero. People, if they're lucky enough to have an overdraft, which is not anything like the kind of foregone conclusion that it was 20 years ago, they'll be at their limit. So you are literally at the till and your card gets nixed. Your card gets rejected. So, yes, you'll be able to afford something next week, but you've run out of soap. And it's Tuesday and you're not getting any money until Friday. But these people don't exist. These scenarios don't exist. Food banks are for the feckless. Food banks are for the work shy and the scroungers. All of the evidence of poverty can be dismissed with disdain by claiming that there is no such thing and that anybody who can't afford X must be failing to work hard enough or spending all their money on avocado toast, Netflix subscriptions or flat screen TVs. If you're a middle class kid who can't afford a house, it's because of Netflix subscriptions and avocado toast. If you're a working class person who can't afford to feed their children, it's because of all your flat screen TVs and your addiction to tenant super. But the same people, I don't know whether you've noticed this, it's quite extraordinary, it's psychologically fascinating. Exactly the same people who deny the existence of financial struggle among poor people suddenly become caped crusaders when wealthy people describe theoretical future financial struggles involving keeping their children in private school. It's quite incredible. And you could make a list of the people who fall into this category. Someone over there can't afford shampoo, liar or scrounger. Feckless, work shy, layabout. Stone them. Person over there isn't going to be able to send their child to private school if the fees go up by 20%. Well, can we set up a crowdfunder? Can we have a whip round? Good grief. Pass me. Let's go have a symphony of tiny violins playing up and down. And it is extraordinary how the population has been gaslit into this position and how the phrase politics of envy, of course, is used to sustain inequality and to in many ways destroy truth. And another thing you should give me a pat on the head for taking half an hour to mention, of course, is champagne socialism. Because when I say that my position on private education is in many ways the most authentic of them all, I benefit from it, I pay for it, I want it abolished, you can't accuse me of the politics of envy. So what do you accuse me of instead? Can you remember? Bueller? Anyone? All together now? Champagne socialism. So if you want more equality and you're on the wrong side of inequality, then it's the politics of envy, right? I hope you're writing this down. If you want more equality and you're on the right side of inequality, then you're a champagne socialist. So literally nobody in the world of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and Rupert Murdoch's troll army, literally nobody is allowed to criticise inequality or unfairness or unearned privilege. Because if you benefit from it and you don't think it should exist, you're a champagne socialist or a hypocrite. If you suffer as a consequence of it and therefore you don't think it should exist, it's the politics of envy. So who's allowed to criticise? And that is a rhetorical question. 10:40 is the time. Jez is in Saxmundham in Suffolk. Jez, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning. I had 3 kids in independent schools through primary years. They didn't go up to independent school for secondary. Couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford it for 3 of them.
Yeah.
Could have maybe got 1 through. But,
Tough, though. You can't really I mean, crikey, that's a tough one, isn't it?
Can't pick your favourite kid there, can you? But what the point I was making was, whilst the entire system is unfair, to stop groups getting into that system, which, whether we like it or not, does provide a better level of education. I think the outcomes are, generally always better.
So, I mean, some of the statistics on access to certain jobs are absolutely chilling. And it won't be necessarily all private schools, but you look at things like MPs, 35% went to private school, High Court judges, 35%, top bankers, 51%, medics, 51%, leading news journalists, have a guess, Jez.
75%.
Yes, 70%. But hey, there's a margin of error. So there is the evidence of advantage.
Yeah, and the other bit is I really noticed. I didn't go through the independent system. I was a good 1980s state school system. Education was celebrated.
Yes,
for all of my ability and attainment was celebrated, and to be outside of that, whether you agree with the system or not, puts you at a disadvantage. I think all of these independent schools are businesses. I think you made the point, they'll find ways of keeping pupil numbers high. And one of your earlier callers said, they're not all Eton. They're,
no, I know.
Our school, the school that my kids went to, it's, lovely old building. But there were a good chunk of folks like us. There were a lot.
Like my parents. I got teased because my dad drove a Morris. Wouldn't have been a Marina, would it, by then? Maybe an Ital, a Morris Ital. One kid's dad hired a Bentley for exhibition weekend, and the truth came out about 6 months later. It wasn't even their car, because we say it was from Ireland, and someone said, "Did he bring it over from Ireland on the ferry?" He goes, "No, he hired it from a place in London and driven it all the way up to Yorkshire." So I know we're not all little Lord Fauntleroys or Lord Snooties or penny farthings in human form, but if you reduce, say, from 7%, which it is now, to 5%, then do you not think these other numbers would come down? The 35% of MPs, the 70% of journalists, the 51% of top bank, wouldn't they have to?
I don't think they will, to be honest. I think there's enough in that system to perpetuate it. So and there's no hope of any significant change to our education system over the next 20 years.
Well, that's the point at which Keir Starmer would argue with you and would say, that is absolutely not the case. We will do what the last Labour government did with regard to education. We will prioritise it, we will fund it, and part of that funding will be provided by the VAT we raise on the school fees that people like us pay.
And that's true, but the funds, so my daughter, really good example of this. Lovely girl, intelligent, very well behaved, because she had that kind of drummed into her
Yes.
through her primary years. You know, you respect your teachers and all of that kind of stuff. She ends up getting lumped next to the tearaway kids as a good influence. Yeah, we've asked to talk about this. She regularly gets sat next to people who are disruptive in class, and you ask, and the reason is, well, she's a good influence, so we're hoping that washes off on this kid.
I mean, that could have happened regardless of what sort of primary school she went to. I know it's a very personal example and a very poignant one, but it's not necessarily an argument against VAT on private schools, is it?
But broadly speaking, if you're paying for that service, I think your influence over your kids in that also increases their academic
Here's my zinger.
view.
Here's my zinger. You ready? Because I was a disaster at school. I was so badly behaved. It was one of the poshest schools in the country. I got expelled. So I could use myself as a very specific example to challenge what you say. And if I'd been at home with my parents, I'd have been much less naughty. If we want, so 7% of children currently go to private school. We would like a country in which 93% of people who went to state school, who go to schools like your daughters, make up 93% of the roles that we listed earlier, the senior judges, the top bankers, the medics, the leading news journalists. So if we want 93% of those roles to be filled by children who went to state schools, which would be the statistically fair way of doing it, what policy would we introduce?
But
I told you it was a zinger.
Yeah, it is a zinger. And we all know there's lies, damn lies and statistics.
Because what you could do, you could ensure that 100% of children who were state educated filled 100% of High Court judge roles, 100% of top banker roles, and 100% of medic roles. You could do that.
You could do that, but the influence then wouldn't come through what school you went to. The influence would still persist and be pervasive from who's your father again.
There'd be some of that. But it would be much less, I think, and the meritocracy would kick in a lot more. I think. I don't know, and you're like all callers today. Your honesty is really helpful in pinpointing why this is not a political issue for many voters. It's a very personal issue, which is perhaps why the Tory media is trying to use it. I mean, partly I suspect it's because they're really struggling to find things to hit Keir Starmer over the head with. Kemi Badenoch this morning reached for toilets. But this one keeps coming back, so much so, in fact, that it was in the papers this very weekend, which is why the tax expert, Dan Needle, took it upon himself to have a proper look at what was being claimed. It's last week, not last weekend, last Tuesday, on that front page that said 4 in 10 to quit private school under Keir's tax. And, let's just say that the phrase fake news may spring to mind when you hear Dan's analysis of that story and the survey it was supposedly based on after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:50 is the time. A slightly left field contribution from Simon, who writes, I've taught the spoiled brats in these private schools, James. Most of them couldn't run a bath. For evidence, see the current cabinet. That's not really the angle we're taking on the conversation today, Simon, but, personal testimony is always welcome. And to that end, we turn next to Dan Needle, who is the founder of Tax Policy Associates, the independent tax think tank, and whose attention was caught, I think it's fair to say, Dan, by that Daily Mail front page last week, which claimed 4 in 10 to quit private school under Keir's tax. So you started digging.
Yes, 40% is a massive response, and we don't normally see any kind of effect that large for any tax, so it's surprising. Now, the Mail referred to a report by Baines Cutler, who are an educational consultancy, but I couldn't find that.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Do we know what that means? Is that do I go to them for help on picking the right private school for my children, or is it?
I don't think so. I think private schools go to them for help with stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Don't know the details, but it seems not statistics.
Sure.
Tell
me more.
So I dropped a line to Baines Cutler, wondering what the methodology was. And they told me they sent out surveys to parents, they got 30,000 back, and they added them up. And that's all they did. It's like a Twitter poll. It's like right now, if you got your listeners to call in on one phone line to vote yes, another to vote no, if you did that and then said, this predicts result of the next election, I think people would laugh at you. because
again,
we know
yes,
that's not statistically valid. But back in the 30s, this was a big argument. The Literary Digest sent out millions of questionnaires to its readers and got something like 3 million back, and said on the back of that it predicted the results of the 1936 US presidential election. And they got it wrong. And Gallup, who sent out an opinion poll, conducted opinion polling in the more modern way, got it right. And that was the death of the idea that you can just send out surveys and get accurate results.
We're talking about
have learned for hundreds of years.
Statistical controls, aren't we, really? There were none.
It surprises many people, I think, that YouGov can poll 1,000 people and get it more or less bang on. But if you have 30,000 survey results, it's worthless. And the reason is that Gallup, YouGov, all the rest go to great lengths to get a representative sample that reflects the population. But if you send a survey back, the people who return it to you are going to be, could just be chance that they're different from everyone else. It could well be they're more motivated than the people who don't return it. But either way, you're not getting a valid result. And to their credit, Baines Cutler say they knew this. They did the exercise to help schools financially model. Doesn't seem to me a great way to do that, but never mind. They said they didn't intend that it should be scaled up to show the results across the country.
It was the Daily Mail that did that. It was the Daily Mail that did that.
It's unclear how much is the Daily Mail and how much is the Independent Schools Council.
Okay.
I don't have the full Baines Cutler report.
Why not?
The Independent Schools Council is just not available.
Oh.
The Independent Schools Council do. They sent some kind of excerpt or summary, I'm not clear exactly what, to the Mail. Baines Cutler tell me that their report says it's not statistically representative of pupils as a whole. That information didn't get to the Mail. The Independent Schools Council denied to me that the Baines Cutler report says it's not statistically representative. I don't have the report. I don't know who's telling the truth. But I know this. That kind of statistics is in GCSE maths. Did the Independent Schools Council really not know this was a statistically worthless report? If they didn't know, then I have to say I think they're incompetent. And if they did know, what on earth were they doing?
Well, they were trying to secure the sort of front page. I know that's a rhetorical question, but for the benefit of the tape, they were trying to secure the front page in last Tuesday's Daily Mail that they secured. And the quote you got from Baines Cutler is that the entire point of this data, and plenty of radio phone-ins have been conducted off the back of this front page as well. But the report it's based on, the people that conducted it told you the entire point of this data in our report was to give schools something to model because there is such a lack of clarity from Labour's actual plans. Make of that what you will. But crucially, it was never designed to be grossed up to the entire population of pupils like the Daily Mail have done. And the 224,000 number has never been published anywhere in our reports and is in our eyes, the people who did the report, too high for many reasons. And yet, of course...
I wouldn't necessarily blame the Mail for this. I'm not sure whether this is the fault of the ISC or the Daily Mail.
But anybody who has based their opinion on this subject, or indeed their radio phone-in programme on this front page, has been rather badly misled.
Yeah, the number is meaningless.
What? I mean, is there a meaningful number anywhere? I know this is a bit off-piste for you, but did you, during your sort of pontification...
I have to give a boring answer that it's not my expertise. There is a report from the Independent Fiscal Studies, which is a serious-minded report, which comes to a figure of, I think around, this is from memory, around 8%, but I could be wrong. There's a study from the Adam Smith Institute which critiques aspects of the IFS paper and is worth reading for that alone, but also takes some previous Baines Cutler research seriously, which I think now should be viewed as a mistake. So the IFS is the go-to place for the figure on this. That, I think, is all we have.
And where can my listeners read your work in glorious detail, Dan?
If they go to the Tax Policy Associates website, taxpolicy.org.uk, they will see a report on the Mail headline, what Baines Cutler told me, and what we think it means. Which
I would urge everyone interested in this story, and indeed interested in how the media works. I would urge everybody to do that. Dan Needle, thank you. That was very enjoyable. 10:56 is the time. So, if I were to suggest a phone in based on that Daily Mail front page, I would essentially be either deceiving or misleading you, whether consciously or not. That doesn't really matter because the facts are now out there. Back to the question of fairness. George is in Nottingham. George, what would you like to say?
Oh, yeah. So just quite interestingly, the Daily Mail statistics of 4 out of 10 children, if that was to be the case, I would say that it would be more towards it would be fair. However, the actual statistics that we've been hearing, to the 8%, 10% sort of mark of children leaving, that would be unfair, I would say.
Interesting. So there is a number, isn't there? I think you're where I am. There's a point at which it's like a tipping point at which if it has a big enough effect, it goes one way, but if it just nibbles at the sides, it goes the other way. I don't know whether that actually stands up to statistical analysis. We'd have to ask Dan Needle, but that's where you are.
Yeah, so just to preface it as well, I fully intend on voting Labour in this upcoming election. I mean, I don't know if
is he allowed to say that? I mean, other parties are available. You've got me now in the Purda paranoia, it's called, George. Other parties are available. I want to make that absolutely clear. And a full list of candidates of all constituencies is easily available. Don't tell me any more about your voting intentions. What do you think specifically about this policy?
Yes, I do just think it isn't going far enough for my personal beliefs. I'm in the same boat as you. I feel like private schools should be abolished. I don't currently send my child to a private school as much as I would, given the circumstances. If I could, I would. However, I do believe that they should be abolished.
And yet, if this merely nibbles at the sides, well, hang on, because it could go the other way. It nibbles at the sides, but it also frees up a significant sum of money for the state school sector. If it's a 10% figure, let's say, then that's a lot of VAT being raised on the people staying in the system.
Yeah, it would work out at about 60,000 pupils, right? I think Nick Farrar mentioned this morning a statistic of 20% would be 120,000. So, if the VAT money on private schools was to go straight into the public school system, say that funds the 6,500 teachers.
Well, that's what they're saying it will do. That is the plan, isn't it?
Would that theoretically then increase the capacity and increase the quality of public schools to be on that of the level of private schools? And I don't believe it would. So there has to be a sort of break point where we either remove private schools and increase the productivity of public schools, or just reduce the private schools slightly and then also increase the public schools to be somewhat nearer for me to be fully on board.
Yeah, no, that's probably the calmest analysis. And like me, you would if you could, but you can't. I can. That's the difference between you and me, even as we acknowledge that the sort of fundamental broader unfairness of it. Thank you, George. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Of course, the other big stick that certain people have used to try to land blows on Keir Starmer and the Labour Party is Diane Abbott, which is very moving, isn't it? Given that the people wielding the stick have spent decades maligning and abusing, often in the roundest terms, the first black female MP. I was away last week. I don't know whether you noticed. There's absolutely no reason why you should have done. But it's an odd story, and I think it's quite a big story. It's, again, not unlike Kemi Badenoch's toilets. It doesn't actually nudge the needle on big polls. But I think for ethnic minority Labour supporters, it remains a much bigger deal than broader polling would allow, which is why we'll be talking about it after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is. I won't keep labouring the point that I was off last week, but I do engage with the news considerably less than I do when I'm at work. Most of the time, if I'm up a mountain, I don't have any choice in the matter. But even like over breakfast and stuff, I don't necessarily pore over the newspapers in the way that I do every morning when I have the enormous privilege of talking to you at 10 o'clock. But the Diane Abbott affair has been, I think, whichever way you look at it, a right old mess. I don't even know if you are aware of the latest wrinkle in this story. I wonder who actually could talk us through it from beginning to end in a way that left out none of the salient facts. I don't think you could, because in many ways it's a story that begins with the beginning of her political career. So certainly for me, my approach to this story while I was off was very heavily coloured by the enormous role that she has played in Labour politics, as opposed to the fine detail of what has happened since she wrote that dreadful letter. That truly awful letter to the Observer. The latest wrinkle is that she will run as a Labour candidate. She denied reports yesterday that she had been offered a seat in the House of Lords and appears to have overcome attempts to effectively bar her from standing, partly because of the groundswell of support that she has enjoyed. How do you want to do this one? Because I'll do it the way we usually do it. I'll tell you what I think, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. How does that work for you? That sounds like a plan. So, and we will have to bring Jeremy Corbyn into it as well, because I think, and we also have to bring ethnicity into it too, because I'm very conscious of being white when I talk about Diane Abbott. I don't mean in a kind of hand-wringing, pearl-clutching, post-colonial guilt kind of way. I just mean that you can't be what you can't see, right? I'm a middle-class, middle-aged, heterosexual, privately educated white man. I can see me everywhere. In fact, it's relevant to the conversation we had in the last hour, isn't it? You look at the... we only looked at the precedence of privately educated people in the top jobs in the judiciary or the media or the health service, countless other places, or indeed politics. So I suspect that the imbalance would become even more skewed if you were to talk about white men in those categories. They'd have even more misrepresentation in the biggest jobs, probably. And that's why I think it's important to acknowledge that before telling you what I think about this story. Because what I think about this story is that Keir Starmer's weird combination of ruthlessness and caution is at the heart of the Diane Abbott saga. And even as I say those words out loud, I'm conscious of I'm almost being oxymoronic, which makes a nice change from being simply moronic, doesn't it? But I'm almost being oxymoronic on this. Can you be ruthless and cautious at the same time? Can you have ruthless... I don't think you can have cautious ruthlessness, can you? But can you have ruthless caution? I think you can have ruthless caution, but you can't have cautious ruthlessness. It's possible my fascination with the work that words do doesn't extend entirely to every single pair of ears currently listening to this program, but I think there is a difference between ruthless caution and cautious ruthlessness. And what ruthless caution has done in the case of Sir Keir Starmer is create a very fixed determination to detach his Labour Party from the Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn. Now, he was a senior member of that shadow cabinet, of course, but from the moment he got over the line, and for many people, some of the things that he said and the promises that he made to get over the line have subsequently been broken in an unforgivable fashion. That's not the meat and drink of today's conversation, but I think it's context. His ruthless caution has determined a path which necessitates the jettisoning of anything obviously associated with what went before. And that is why chucking Jeremy Corbyn out of the party entirely, and it would appear seeking to show Diane Abbott the door in a slightly less high-profile fashion, have unfolded. And I think they made a mistake. And I want you to tell me, well, I suppose the first thing you have to tell me is whether or not you agree that they made a mistake. But presuming that you do, actually, no, I won't presume that you do. You may think it is really, well, first of all, you may go back to the letter that Diane Abbott wrote to The Observer, in which she effectively claimed that Jewish people and other groupings, including, I think, travellers, had not or could not experience racism. I want to get the words exactly right, because I looked it up last night when I was thinking about talking about this today. And I was actually, even though I knew it at the time, she denied that Jewish people, Irish people or traveller people could experience racism. She said they undoubtedly experience prejudice, but said that is similar to racism, but added, for reasons that I will never understand, to be honest with you, that it is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as red heads, can experience this prejudice. So she compared victims of the Holocaust, effectively, to people with ginger hair in the context of prejudice and racism. I wish that was an exaggeration, you know, because those words sound mad, right? Out loud. She compared the immutable characteristics that would have seen you sent to the gas chambers for being either Jewish or indeed part of the Romani community. Those immutable characteristics, because they were part of a white person's identity, they can't be racism, they can only be prejudice, which was just such an unnecessary and offensive intervention. I understand the point she was trying to make, by the way, because the other line about in pre-civil rights America, Irish people, Jewish people and travellers were not required to sit at the back of the bus. Again, you know, and she says in apartheid South Africa, these groups were allowed to vote, which just is screaming in my head. Yeah, what about now do Nazi Germany? But the point she's trying to make was made brilliantly by David Baddiel's niece, actually, in the documentary he did off the back of his brilliant book on the subject. And David Baddiel's niece is mixed race. So she has I think a white dad, a white Jewish dad and a black mum. And she could actually pinpoint some of what Diane Abbott was driving at, because she's never going to be pulled over in her car for being Jewish. Whereas we know that you are likely to be pulled over in your car for being black. So that's what she was trying to talk about. But she did it in such an obnoxious way. I use that word regretfully. Did it in such an obnoxious way that it absolutely exploded. And Keir Starmer responded, of course, by suspending the whip and mounting an investigation. Now, what appeared while I was off were claims, in fact, Newsnight nailed this, Victoria Derbyshire and her colleagues over at Newsnight, essentially established that the inquiry had been over for months. And whether Keir Starmer knew this or not is a question he will no doubt be asked in the coming days. But it meant that when he was publicly insisting that the inquiry needed to be allowed to conclude, that it needed to be allowed to run its course, he was misleading people, whether deliberately or not, because it was over. And the whip has now been restored. And it seemed to me on Saturday that the hope was, in fact, I think I said so on a stage in Derby, the hope was that she would quit the stage with dignity restored and possibly head for a seat in the Lords. That sounded like a poem. It wasn't intended to. So she would quit the scene, she would quit the stage with her dignity and her whip restored, but she wouldn't want to run in the looming election. I guess it was one of the things that the unexpected announcement brought to the surface, taking lots and lots of people by surprise. And now it would appear that she is going to stand. So I approve, and I'm happy to take all of the abuse that this will traditionally provoke. I approve of Keir Starmer's determination to make the Labour Party electable, to detach it from the madness that went on before. And I fully appreciate that you are possibly not persuaded that it was madness. And, you won anyway, didn't you, in 2017? And indeed in 2019, when Boris Johnson achieved an 80-seat majority, Jeremy Corbyn won the argument. I know that because he said so. So I appreciate the existence of people who don't understand or agree with the idea that Keir Starmer's top priority was to detach the Labour Party from the legacy of the previous leadership, and that Diane Abbott was very, very, very much seen as a crucial part of the previous leadership. But I obviously think that they've handled this incredibly badly, and I don't think that the public at large see Diane Abbott as divisive a figure, or as, forgive me, but as ridiculous a figure as Jeremy Corbyn. So the ruthless caution with which Keir Starmer has sought to almost snip the blue touch paper before they can even light it. And is there anything more pathetic than Rishi Sunak resurrecting the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn at PMQs every week, when Keir Starmer has literally, or rather when the Labour Party has literally chucked him out? So I don't think that Diane Abbott was sufficiently associated, because she was the first black woman MP, because her profile was high long before you knew Jeremy Corbyn's name, because she was a queen of the panel show, a queen of the TV interview. She's had some embarrassing experiences latterly, but Diane Abbott's status as a Labour figure, for me, had absolutely nothing to do with her briefish tenure as Shadow Home Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And that is why I was pretty disgusted by the way she was treated. I think the letter she wrote was disgusting, but you make a decision about that and you make it quite quickly. What you don't do is, in a sense, hang her out to dry and to be humiliated. And the reason why that has happened is the ruthless caution, the determination to detach his leadership from the last leadership. So that's quite a nuanced analysis. Now, don't laugh. I know you're not supposed to describe your own analysis as nuanced, but it means that I somehow think that Diane Abbott should have been suspended for that letter. I think the letter has been forgotten a lot in the coverage of the last few days. I think the letter was extraordinarily unpleasant. I think if it wasn't anti-Semitic, then it would display unconscious bias on an almost unbelievable level. But I also think, as she demonstrated in that infamous interview with Nick Ferrari a few years ago, that her grasp of the detail is not what it was once. And therefore, maybe there's a defence to say, as she did herself very, very quickly apologise, that she just had a rush of blood to the head and dropped an absolute clanger. But goodness me, that original offence was absolutely immense. So how can you be simultaneously convinced that the original offence was immense, but also that she's been treated very badly by the Labour Party? I recognise this. I'm going to read some of this from Annie. Just let me check it first, because I tried to do this at the beginning. And I did acknowledge it, Annie. Perhaps you missed it. She said, James, you're not black, so you have no idea. Starmer only suspended her because of all the other baggage re-anti-Semitism. So immediately, I've got a little alarm going off in my head when I said, what do you mean because of all the other baggage re-anti-Semitism? I suppose if you subscribe to the idea that Corbyn's leadership didn't have a problem with anti-Semitism, then you can make this point. But she wrote a letter saying that Jews don't suffer from racism. That's not baggage associated with her. That's her words. She wrote it down. And yet somehow, somewhere, they've fluffed this up enormously. So this doesn't always work as a phone-in. But I want to do it this way. I'm going to need your help. I want to do a really broad invitation. I want to know what you think of this story. What do you think of Diane Abbott's recent experiences? 0345 6060973. What do you think of Diane Abbott's treatment by the Labour Party? And ideally, you'll come at it from a myriad of angles. Not exclusively Labour supporters by any stretch of the imagination, but also people who feel. I'd particularly like to hear from people who feel that that the letter, what she wrote, was so egregious that there should never have been any path back into the Labour Party for her as a candidate, because you have been let down as well. I mean, who emerges from this with credit? The Labour Party don't, because whatever the final decision was going to be, it was made in such an opaque and clumsy fashion that more damage was done than could ever be undone by the decision itself when it finally arrived. Diane Abbott shouldn't emerge with credit, I'm afraid, because of what she wrote about Irish people and travellers and Jews. Keir Starmer certainly doesn't emerge with any credit because, whether consciously or not, he misled voters. So who does? So I just want to know what you think about Diane Abbott's treatment by the Labour Party. And I am across the facts. I only mentioned at the beginning that I don't follow the news as closely when I'm on holiday as I do when I'm not. But I don't come on air without, I try not to, good God, famous last words, I try not to come on air without appraising myself of all of the facts that I can, or as many of the facts as I can. And I think I've done so here, up to and including, of course, the condemnation from the Board of Deputies of British Jews, described it as disgraceful, and her subsequent apology as entirely unconvincing, because she claimed that errors had arisen in an initial draft, and even that, of course, was subsequently questioned. So what do you think of this story? Keir Starmer emerges poorly. Diane Abbott certainly began the process poorly. But where are you now? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:23. I'm going to say something quite funny, and I know he would have appreciated it, but I'd say a few words, certainly before close of play today, about the passing of Rob Burrow. The words legacy and legend are horribly overused in this era, and goodness me, in this profession, in this business, the media, but Rob deserved both of them and then more, but he'd appreciate what I'm about to say. How do you think I'm going to be able to bring Brexit into the passing of the legend that was Rob Burrow, who, if you weren't aware, died yesterday at the age of 41 after not only achieving extraordinary things on the pitch as a rugby league player for Leeds Rhinos and England, of course, but also, of course, his campaigning and public battle against motor neurone disease for pretty much the last 5 years of his life was epic and extraordinary. But how do you think I'm going to be able to bring Brexit into paying tribute to Rob Burrow? That is a question I'm fairly confident you won't be able to answer. And if I tell you that when I remembered, I was going through some correspondence last night, I very nearly cried. I was just such the language that I'm going to share with you later. There's something about it that was almost unbearably poignant. But on the funny side of things, which I know he would appreciate, how's he going to bring Brexit? How's he going to bring bloody Brexit into Rob Burrow's passing? Keith, do not let me forget this one, all right? This is absolutely something that I will never forgive myself for forgetting to come back to a little later. But we turn first, of course, to Diane Abbott. And just essentially your thoughts on it, but through the lens of context that I hope I provided a few moments ago. Lloyd's in Lewisham. Lloyd, what do you think?
I think that Diane Abbott's comments were, at the very best, ham-fisted and wrong. Yeah. Although I kind of understand where she was coming from as a black man. But I also think... You understand
what you think she meant, but you recognise that what she actually said was outrageous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
But I also think Labour, regardless of that letter, wants rid of her and has been even more ham-fisted in the way they've done that. They want rid of her, I believe, because of the baggage that she comes with, predominantly from the racist media she gets and press that she gets. I mean, I don't really like her that much. I don't like her that much.
No, fair enough. But I don't think they want to get rid of her because of the negative reactions she provokes in the kind of people that were marching in London this weekend. They want to get rid of her because of her associations with the previous leadership.
Well, yes, but let me qualify that.
Of course.
Let me qualify that. You've noticed how Keir Starmer is very carefully and skillfully, because he wants to be elected, is dancing around the whole Brexit issue, not wanting to mention certain things.
Yes.
There's certain things he does not want on the table because he doesn't want to scare the horses.
Yes, exactly. That's what I call ruthless caution, which is probably, you would think, quite a generous way of putting it.
It's a generous way of putting it. And I understand it. It doesn't quite sit right with me.
Yeah.
Because I think it's slightly dishonest. I understand why it's been done, because you can't effect change if you're not in power.
Exactly.
But he has handled it in a ham-fisted way, and he would have wanted shot of her anyway, because she would be a perfect target for the right-wing media, which he doesn't want.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that. So no matter how...
However, whichever way you dice it, no one emerges well, but Diane emerges better than anybody else.
Yes, she does, and she apologised. And I think I know what she was trying to say. I think she's trying to say that as a black person.
Yeah, but mate, you know how the world works. Lloyd. I'm not a black person, but you can't really ever reach, certainly in the modern media age, for the defence of please don't focus on the words I actually said. Please focus on the ones that I didn't say but wish I had. You just can't do that anymore. I don't think you ever could.
I'm not reaching for that.
You are a bit. No, she is. She is.
No, but what I'm trying to say is, when you think about the abuse that she gets, I'm not surprised that she could come out with these, the best way of saying it is these missteps or ham-fisted remarks. Because she's under pressure all the time.
Yeah.
So she's saying she cannot go out and hide that. She can't have a respite from that. That's what I think she was trying to say. But regardless of that, that is not why she's been ousted or why they want to oust her.
No, I agree. I think we disagree on what the reasons are, but we agree that that's not the reason. The letter is not the reason. Whether it should be or not is open to discussion. But that's why I use the phrase ruthless caution. I don't think that she would necessarily have drawn the sort of fire that you describe, if your analysis is correct, or given her history and the longevity of her parliamentary career and the size of her public profile, I don't think she is a sort of just a Corbyn acolyte. She's so much more than that. So it wouldn't have been, I don't think, politically advantageous for her foes, for the people who don't want a Labour government, to keep banging on about her role under the previous leadership. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what Starmer's calculation was, or at least the party machine's calculation was, that she was too closely associated with what went before. It's coming up to past, lots of calls waiting, and of course we have to catch up with Keir Starmer's speech today, which went in very hard on defence. Here's a little teaser for you. How many candidates do you think... actually, I've got Purda paranoia again. I'm not even going to do that one. I was going to do one about candidates from a military background, but I only know the answer to that from one party. So if I did that from one party, would I be in trouble? Let me just check the guidelines. Hang on. Thomas Watts has the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time, and I can do this. I've checked the guidelines. How many ex-forces candidates do you think that the Labour Party will be putting up at the general election? I'll tell you when Natasha gets here with a report on Keir Starmer's speech today, which is focused largely on defence issues. How many? That's a simple question. I'm not going to give you any clues at all. 11:33 is the time. Back to Diane Abbott, and let's go to Manchester next. Joy's there. Joy, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Jane.
I just wanted to get in on this conversation, just to say a few things around the whole Diane Abbott. I would call it a debacle, really.
Yes, that's a good, great word, actually, and it's alliteration. Well played.
And the first thing I wanted to say was, just to put it out there, as a black woman, I do agree with what she said, what she wrote in The Observer, though to categorise her as an anti-Semite because of it, I just think was just totally an overreaction. I think what Diane Abbott was really trying to say... No,
you see, I'm going to have to stop you there.
Sure.
Because we have to focus on what she said.
Yes,
and what she said was that Jews can't be victims of racism.
No, and what I'm saying is, and like I said...
So you don't agree with that, do you?
I don't think she meant it like that.
I don't care what she meant, Joy.
What I think...
You can't agree with something she didn't say. You can only agree or disagree with what she said.
Yeah, and I say I am agreeing with what she said. I'm not.
So you don't think
back.
You don't think Jews can be victims of racism? You don't think Irish people can be victims of racism?
She said that they were victims of prejudice,
yeah,
not racism.
Exactly.
So what I'm trying to say is, I believe what she meant by that was...
We're going round in silly circles now. You can't judge someone by what you think they meant to say when you know what they said.
And like I said, I'm not going back on anything. Right. I'm not going back on my agreement with her. But what I'm trying to say
I'm Irish, and so you don't think I can be a victim of racism? You don't think that the treatment of the Irish people by the English over the last 1,000 years has been in any way racially motivated? Because that would be impossible. We've simply been victims of prejudice. The potato blight, the famine, that was just English landowners coming in, buying up huge swathes of Ireland and watching Irish people die. That was just prejudice.
But what I'm trying to say, if you'd let me speak...
Well, I'm letting you speak, but I'm reminding you can't keep telling me that you agree with what she said, but you don't think that she actually said what she meant.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, if I can finish the sentence, was that my belief was that the darker you are, the worse society will treat you and based on your colour. Now, with regard to yourself who's Irish, I wouldn't know you're Irish unless you told me. You know I'm black because you're going to see that.
No, I understand what you're saying,
So
Joy.
that is why I believe...
Yes, but she didn't say any of that.
I know she didn't say any of that.
So how
but
can
that
you
is what
agree
I
with
think
her?
there. Because that is what she meant. That is, I believe, what she meant.
Okay, fine. So that's brilliant then. So whenever anybody says anything obnoxious, we can call up you and you'll tell us that that's not what they meant at all.
Well, it depends on who's... If it's more of a black person, yes, you could do.
Okay. So
Don't
whenever a
try
black
and
person says something obnoxious...
gaslight me and my experience as a black woman.
No, no one is. Don't try and gaslight me about what Diane Abbott actually said.
I'm not gaslighting
You are. You're telling me to ignore her words.
I can understand what it was that she meant.
I can understand what it was that she meant. It's obvious what it was that she meant, but why would she deny that racism exists for Jewish people or Irish people? Why not talk about gradations of racism? Why not say the racist experience of a black person will be different? It will be profoundly different. It will be measurably worse than the racist experience of a white person. You'd struggle to sustain that position if someone brought...
you with regards to why
No, you can tell me. No, you've just told me. You can tell me exactly what she means.
Yes, because she probably thought that everybody could see the point that she was making.
Which was that you can't be a victim of racism. You can't be a victim of racism if you're Jewish.
Lie or look at anybody else's experience.
I think, we both know what she meant, Joy, but we get judged in public life by what we say.
We do.
But you're giving her a free pass.
I don't believe I'm giving her a free pass.
You're saying don't judge her by what she said.
I'm not saying don't judge her.
And it wasn't exactly a spur of the moment. It was a letter with several drafts.
I understand what it was that she was trying to say.
I can as well.
You can judge her how you want.
I can understand exactly. I think I know what she was trying to say.
Not how to judge her.
But Joy, here we go. All right, this is probably the end of my contribution to this conversation.
Well, I wanted to go on to say.
No, hang on. I haven't finished yet. I haven't finished interrupting you.
You made a good attempt at it.
What you have done is say, I agree with what she said, and then you've gone on to say that she didn't actually mean what she said. So you can't do both.
I was saying I could understand what she was saying.
No, you said you agree with what she said. That was your first line when you said, no, you agree with what you think she meant, but you don't agree with what she said, which is why we're actually on exactly the same page.
Well, like I said, it wasn't the only point I wanted to make.
Well, go on, make your other one then. You've got. It's only 11:38. Fill your boots.
Right. What I wanted to say was, with regards to your last caller,
yes.
and I agreed with what he said, that little bit that I heard about the reasons how the party treats.
Yes.
And I just wanted to go ahead with somebody who has been in the party for so long, the total lack of respect for her over the last few weeks, probably even longer than a few weeks if I'm honest, has been something that as a black woman, why I personally would never vote for Labour. I remember when she was on, just to go back a little, I remember maybe about a year or two ago, somebody who was on Nick Ferrari's show, it was a male Labour politician, he'd asked him something, made a reference to Diane Abbott and what she believed in, etc., and he more or less said, Diane Abbott, nobody listens to what she said.
That's
now, that
disgusting.
was somebody within the own Labour Party, somebody who has been sort of a pioneer for black women and just being able to get into Parliament. And that's what he said. I remember there was also, I can't remember her name, but she's the Labour politician who's in the Midlands, who wanted to run for the leadership, I think it was. She took great pleasure in... Sorry?
I just want to double check that I think that we're talking about the same person. Someone else has been told that they're not going to be able to stand for...
Oh no! It wasn't her. She was. She's quite. I don't want to say she's quite common, but she's Midlandser. She's a Midland MP, and what she said was, I swore at Diane Abbott. I told her to.
Jess Phillips.
Yes. And she took quite.
Swears at everyone.
She took pleasure in saying that. Just getting up there and just saying.
This is the bit. This is the bit where your skin colour gives you an insight I will never have.
Right. Okay.
Isn't it?
It is. I can. Yeah. And I'm glad that you see that.
I do see that. I don't think that was true in the first bit of this conversation because we were talking about what words mean. But when you know what it is like to feel that you are being prejudged. And obviously Jess Phillips would reject this accusation completely, but you have lived it. I have not really. I mean, if I say I've been a victim of racism because my teacher at prep school hated Irish people, it sounds a little bit silly to you.
Right, right. But that being said, certainly, and I don't want to go back on that racing because I don't want to take up too much time, but I just really wanted to go back and say something about the Labour Party and Diane Abbott. And it's just that, to me, she became it was like she was a figure of fun.
Which wouldn't have happened to a white woman.
Correct.
Of her intelligence, because I can think of white women who have become figures of fun, like Nadine Dorries, but
yes, and you've hit the nail on the head, because although I don't think this necessarily turned out as a race issue, the way in which they treated her, I do not believe they would have treated her if she was a white woman, especially 70-year-old white woman with health problems.
And with a lack of dignity is what you're describing. A lack of dignity and a lack of respect, which maybe because, I mean, it'd be a combination of things, her closeness to Corbyn, but I think it would be not just be wrong, it would be ridiculous of me to try to argue with you that it had nothing to do with her skin colour.
Exactly. Now, I don't know whether this may not be maybe conscious, maybe it's unconscious, but another point that I wanted to quickly raise was about when the donor to the Tory party made those racist comments.
The racist Frank Hester.
Yes. About because of her...
wanting to have her shot.
Yes, and she makes him hate all black women.
Yeah.
And then Starmer dragged his feet in saying anything about it.
Did he?
And when he did, and even Diane pulled him up on this, the only thing he said was, the first thing he said was, they should give the money back. He never said, he never dealt with the fact that he made a racist comment about...
Still got the money.
Thing. Yeah, that was his concern. Oh, they should give the money back. And wasn't until she pointed...
Call out the abuse, not the cash.
And wasn't until she pointed this out to him that he then said something further. And then you saw that whole thing when she was trying to stand up in the Houses of Parliament to say something, where Lindsay Hoyle wouldn't go to her for a comment, where she stood up, I think somebody counted it, was counted about 40-odd or 50-odd times.
So it wouldn't take her. I mean, there's probably an argument for that in parliamentary tradition, but they've broken parliamentary. They prorogued it when Johnson was Prime Minister. So, yeah, they
could have. I think, especially on that occasion, made an exception. If that's the reason why it didn't go to her.
I think we did a phone-in on that at the time. We made that point at the time.
It was just, like I said, and it was
cruel.
I felt humiliated for her.
Yeah, I did.
It was embarrassing to watch that they would treat somebody like that. And now, all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, everyone's now, revering her and looking at her career and what she's done as a black female MP. And I'm thinking to myself, but you never thought that. You never showed her that kind of courtesy yourself within the party.
This is a big deal for you. This is, I mean that in terms of turning off decades of support for a party, this has been enough to flick your switch.
Yeah, because with everything that's going on, etc., you just feel that you're constantly being gaslighted. Yeah. You tell them about the way you daren't say anything now because it used to be before, you're playing the race card, etc. But I just noticed things are getting worse for us as black people within the UK.
And historically, the Labour Party would be part of the solution to that problem, not part of the
anymore.
problem.
And
that's hard. I mean, that's a very serious thing that you're saying.
What I would say is, I would tell fellow black people, do not vote for them. That's how bad it is. Do not vote for them. Look at the way they have treated her.
Even if she stands?
Do you know what? I was surprised that she did that. She should have went as an independent. I would have left them at that point, and I would...
You haven't answered my question, to be fair. You haven't answered my question. Even if she stands, you would tell black people not to vote for her.
I would tell them do not vote for them. And I'm
don't vote for her?
Well, do not vote for them.
Well, she's one of them.
Yes, all of them. I would tell them do not vote for them, her included. Because, like I said, because we're tolerated, she's tolerated, and we're tolerated just about. How they've treated her is synonymous to how they treat us. I mean, that whole kneeling on the, taking a knee, cynical ploy to retain the black vote. When, is it
But this is. Listen. I hope you feel you filled your boots. I said I'd give you. Lots and lots of times. But we do have to take it back to the beginning. And I can agree with everything that you've said since. But you can't separate what we both know she meant to say from what she actually said, which is that's why we fell out at the beginning. I wasn't trying to gaslight you. I was just pointing out that everything you've said subsequently is true, but the original offence you mitigate by saying that the words she said should be ignored and the thoughts she meant should be focused on. And you must see that that's not really on.
No, as in you're right. No, as in you're right.
But we should have done it the other way round. I'm
agreeing with what I think she meant.
Yeah, same. But I agree with what I think she meant.
The words she chose to express that were not the right words. She should have characterised that better. She should have said that better.
How about that? You can tell I've just got back from holiday, Joy. Look at that.
Can I just add one other thing?
Honestly.
Just one other thing, and we can finish and end in accord.
Of course.
And that was with regards to, I think it was the other black female MP who was driving along with her friend, etc., and they were stopped at that point by the police, and she felt that they were racially profiled. Again, silence from Starmer, absolute silence from Starmer. Nothing was said about that. And for me, that was just saying, it's just another thing that I've noticed with him. You know, if it's not a popular cause, if you like, there's no, there's no support. We have no support from him. So that is just another thing that I think to myself, we're tolerated, especially when it comes to voting, but we are not really a people, I don't believe, that the Labour Party support any longer under Starmer.
I'm not going to argue with you because this is, very, very powerful stuff. But the party you're describing, they are still in. I mean, if Diane runs... And Dawn, I think it's Dawn Butler that you're talking about. And I recommend the full disclosure interview that we did together and her book. You're seeing them as not part of the Labour Party now.
No, I see them as being tolerated within that party, I feel that
because they might be offended by that.
I think, but if they admit things themselves, they would notice and admit that the treatment of black people within the party over the years with regards to giving top shadow cabinet positions.
That'll catch on. Cabinet. We've got a cabinet at the moment.
You see them. We haven't got the top shadow cabinet positions within the party over the years.
Foreign Secretary at the moment.
Yes, I was going to say, and it's only recently. First one, I think, was definitely down to Corbyn. Before that, I remember way back in the day, there was the junior cabinet minister,
Boateng.
and I forgot. Yeah, for Boateng, and prior to that, absolutely nothing.
That's amazing.
And so, like I said, I feel we're tolerated within the party, to be honest.
And that is, I hope, a call. I mean, he's been in the middle of delivering a speech, but I hope that that this call is brought to the Labour leader's attention because you covered an awful lot of ground, Joy, and provided an awful lot of food for thought. Thank you, Joy. In some ways, sometimes one call is not in any way denigrating previous callers on this conversation, but sometimes one caller can be the entire point of doing a topic, and I think Joy's just demonstrated that principle in quite spectacular fashion. It's 11:49.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:52. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is with me because Keir Starmer... Is it a speech each one a day? Is it Starmer, then Sunak, then... I mean, how's it working?
It totally depends on the day.
Does it?
Most days, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are both out and about, speaking to activists, giving mini speeches on the stump, turning to...
But then you have a set-piece speech.
Yeah, this has been more of a thematic day for the Labour Party. They're out today talking about defence.
Right.
So you've had comments from both John Healey, the Shadow Defence Secretary, and also Keir Starmer talking about their new triple lock for defence. So, yeah, that's what they've been out and about today. doing. And yes, Keir Starmer said this morning he would be prepared to push the nuclear button if he becomes Prime Minister. So what a change that is.
Always get asked that, don't they?
But it is an important question, James, because obviously the last time we asked the last Labour leader about this, he just would not want to answer that question. He clearly would feel very uncomfortable if he were Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn were Prime Minister, and he had the opportunity to do so. So, yeah, a huge change from that party that just a few years back voted against renewing the Trident nuclear deterrent. And so he said, surrounded by 10 veterans who will be running to be MPs, that he would be prepared to do so.
Firstly, on the nuclear deterrence, it's fundamental. It's a vital part of our defence. And of course that means we have to be prepared to use it. Now, nobody who aspires to be Prime Minister would set out the circumstances, but it is there as a vital part of our defence. So, of course, we would have to be prepared to use it.
It's significant and it isn't significant. I mean, because it's only because of some of the subjects we've been touching on in the previous hour, because of what he inherited, that question has any nuance at all, really, isn't it? Because, of course, you're going to be prepared to activate the nuclear deterrent if circumstances demand it, unless you're the other fella.
Yeah, but for Keir Starmer, he's probably more than welcome to answer this question today. It's all part of his.
It's not a gotcha.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. He probably asked one of the journalists to ask him himself. Say,
what are you suggesting? What are you suggesting, Natasha? Outrageous.
Wouldn't pull back the curtain like that at all, James. But yes, John Healey, Labour's shadow Defence Secretary, was also there. He was speaking about the Tory record on defence and really hit out at 14 years under the Conservatives.
What does it say when they've cut the size of the British Army to the smallest since Napoleon, when they've wasted at least £15 billion on bad defence procurement, when they've missed recruitment targets every year, when morale has fallen to record lows, and when service families have to live, as Louise said, in damp, mouldy housing, and increasingly draw on universal credit and food banks to get by. This is the shameful record of the Conservatives on defence for the last 14 years. They're failing British taxpayers, they're failing British forces.
Now, the Conservatives say that Labour haven't laid out the same sort of defence plan that they have. They've said that they would reach 2.5% of GDP by 2030, and the Labour Party haven't laid that out yet. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, said last night 12 members of Starmer's frontbench team, including Angela Rayner and David Lammy, voted against Trident. We know that Rayner is now making the decisions in Labour, so Starmer's supposed backing for Trident is meaningless. So the Conservatives trying to argue that because some of these people, including Rayner and Lammy, voted against Trident, you can't trust Keir Starmer on defence. But yes, he's trying to say, look, this is a changed Labour Party. And you heard John Healey out on the morning round today defending this. He said that was 2016. This is now, the world is changed. This is part of his very big pitch from the Labour Party to say, look, you can finally trust us on national security, and things are very different now.
And you've got 14 ex-forces candidates on the roster for the Labour Party as well, which is not a coincidence.
It's not. The Labour Party, I actually wrote a story about this about a year ago, about how Labour were targeting specifically.
Well done.
Yeah, no, it's come true. It's come true. They are specifically targeting ex-forces people to try and turn around that and defend. If you look at where they're standing, they're all standing in sort of former military towns as well. So they will obviously have a resonance with the people in those towns. This is a very targeted strategy from the Labour leadership, and it's been ongoing for a while. And you heard Keir Starmer talking about that earlier today when he was at this defence speech. He was saying, John Healey said that Keir Starmer had said to him, never again will we be going into a general election not trusted by the public on defence. He realises that this is a vote winner for so many people. And obviously we've got D-Day coming up, the anniversary of D-Day coming up later this week. Labour Party are on the front foot on defence. I think that will resonate with quite a lot of voters.
Indeed it will. It's hard to know where to start on unpicking this, especially when, unlike you, I've been away for a few days. But it is impossible not to look at the numbers. So any Conservative hopes that the polls were going to move or turn, doing sort of broader vista stuff now, well, it's not happening, is it? And I sense that your profession, more perhaps than mine, as in those of us that are allowed to have opinions versus those of you who are not really supposed to, haven't quite worked out how to process the scale of the potential result, because all of the pollsters now are putting out their seat projections.
Yeah.
And they look freakish, which creates an idea in the mind of some observers that they are freakish, that they will prove to be outliers. but we're heading now towards territory where the outliers are becoming the mainstream.
I think there is definitely concern among Tory ranks that these polls aren't changing, and that's exactly what the Conservatives hoped would happen when the general election was called. They hoped that would mean the polls would start to narrow, but so far we haven't seen really any evidence of that at all. A couple moving by a couple of points, but no real change. And if that continues, that's really going to spook Conservative MPs, and already we're hearing from a few of them going, we don't think the polls are going to change. We genuinely do think this is going to be as much of a nightmare scenario as potentially we feared. And we've got another big poll out today from YouGov, which they've said is going to be releasing later this afternoon. That was one of the most accurate MRP polls, which is a projection of what it would look like for seats in the general election. So if that continues to say what previous MRP polls have said, I think going into Saturday, there were two big polls projecting, like I say, this huge Labour landslide, showing loads of seats for the Labour Party, and lots of people still saying, on the doorstep I'm hearing this, on the doorstep I'm not. We're not seeing that sort of landslide result for the Labour Party. And we heard Victoria Atkins, the Conservative Health Secretary, yesterday on the morning round saying the only poll that matters is the general election. Pollsters have got it wrong before, and of course they have. But these polls...
But they'll all be gathering around every single one that's being published. If it begins to turn, then she'll change her tune pretty flipping quickly.
Definitely, and she seemed incredibly upbeat and optimistic. And of course, I guess you have to be going into election being incredibly optimistic. But look, and I hate to mention the F word on your show, James, but Nigel Farage is making an emergency press conference later today in Westminster, and there is some speculation that he might decide to stand to be an MP for the Reform Party. If that happens, that will only squeeze the Conservative vote even further and potentially completely change some of these prediction polls that we're having. Maybe Nigel Farage, after running 7 times, could he be 8th time lucky and get a seat? Who knows?
Is the Dolphin running?
The Dolphin.
Yeah, because he got beaten one time by a dolphin. I just wonder if that might have influenced. Perhaps he's found out that the dolphin has died, or the dolphin won't be running, so he thinks possibly it's safe to
time
have
to get in there.
Eighth go. Well, thank you, Natasha. Always a pleasure. And we'll certainly be hearing more from you in the coming weeks, possibly even on LBC in the coming hours. It is now 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Change of direction now. I can't bring myself to talk about Kemi Badenoch's toilets. It's just not a subject that I think the Secretary of State for Trade should really be concerning herself with at this point in the political cycle. If you think it's a matter of epic importance, then I'm sure other people will pick up on it. But I'm drawn towards a couple of stories that knit together similar themes about young people voting. I just checking there will be young people listening, won't there, at the moment? Not you, Keith. It fascinates me. So we've got a lad in at the moment who I was interested as a 17-year-old what he would think was worth talking about today. And he mentioned the national service story, and I kind of thought that's probably withered a bit on the Times. But oddly, after Samuel said that, I started reading an article in the Times today about a journalist went to visit Warwick University to sort of canvass political opinion among undergraduates, and he goes in on that national service story. It's a lovely paragraph, actually. James Marriott can really write. A warm sun is breaking through the dreary clouds over Warwick University, and a confused first-year student is fretting about concerning news that has just reached her. The government's planned inscription of young people into the army. Obviously, it's conscription, but inscription is in quotes. And I don't know how politicised or political the younger generation is as this election approaches. I really don't. I mean, I don't even know where you'd go to find out how politicised the younger generation is as this election approaches. Saatchi and Saatchi have been commissioned, the advertising agency, have been commissioned to encourage more young people to vote, regardless of who they vote for. Dale Vince, Chief Executive of Ecotricity, another brilliant guest on Full Disclosure not long ago, has also written today about the importance of getting young people to vote. He describes a third of young people not being registered to vote. And that, of course, is a ground for concern for anyone truly concerned about democracy, but it is good news for one party and bad news for another if you look at the polling of where support lies among younger generations. So it's a really interesting bit of polling that they've done about potential partners and politics. This is a YouGov poll. 40% of Britons aged between 18 and 24 consider regular voters to be more attractive potential partners. I guess it just means you're more engaged with the world around you, does it? If you are a regular voter. I like this bit. A fifth of respondents felt that non-voters would spend more time talking about themselves on a first date and were more likely to be rude to a waiter. There are, I mean, look, I can't define young people, Adam. I can tell you what a Gen Z is. A Gen Z, I think, starts roughly when Tony Blair became Prime Minister, about 1997. But I for my purposes, let's say between 18 and 24. All right? Between 18 and 24. And you can go a bit higher. Everyone's asking me to define a young person. 18 to 24, I think, is a reasonable category, but you can swing. We can have a little margin. You can't go lower than 18 because you can't vote. Bad luck. But we can go a little bit higher. So 18 to 24 brackets, 30 close brackets. How's that? Is that nice? Is that good? So in your 20s, but mostly 18 to 24. There's two ways of doing this, and I'm going to do both of them. What do you care about most if you are in that category? And that presumes a level of political engagement, because what I'm not going to be able to do presenting this programme is find lots and lots of examples of young people who are not politically engaged. I don't think it involves blowing smoke up our own backsides to point out that if you listen to this radio station, or if indeed you listen to this programme on anything approaching a regular basis, then you are politically engaged. You could, I suppose, have tuned in by accident, like Susan Hall always does, the former Tory candidate for Mayor of London. Is constantly tweeting about how she's accidentally been listening to James O'Brien on LBC, bless her. But, I mean, you've accidentally tuned in. You've just caught me speaking at this very specific moment. And you've thought, yeah, I don't care about politics, but I don't think that's going to provide an entire switchboard of calls, is it? People accidentally tuning in, hearing the offer to ring in if you don't care about politics and you are aged between 18 and 24. So we can't do it that way round. But if you are aged between 18 and 24, if you are young, 18 to 24 brackets, 30 close brackets. If you are youngish, what are you voting for or against? What are the issues that most define your priorities going into this election? Because we spend a lot of time, I think, inevitably, perhaps, partly because of my age, and partly because of the sense of time passing, we spend a lot of time looking at the attitudes of much older people. So I want to try and get some young people on to talk about what matters most to you and whether or not there is a political offer on the table at this election that you consider to be attractive. All right, so book your place now. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But here's something I've been meaning to do for a while as well. This is the other side of the same coin. I think that the most depressing stroke dangerous element of political discourse at the moment is the repeated claim, often made in good faith, sometimes made in very bad faith, that all politicians are the same. All politicians are the same. They're all as bad as each other. That, for me, is not true. I think it's fairly obviously not true, but it's a question of engagement, isn't it? If you're not massively engaged, then you will probably think of politicians as a homogenous group of people. And every time a politician gets into trouble or humiliates themselves on the radio, you will find yourself thinking, God, those politicians are blooming awful, aren't they, those politicians? God, those politicians. I worry that creates a lethargy, particularly among young, but not exclusively among younger voters, is that if you let the dog run, the all politicians are the same dog run, if you let that story take hold, if you let that narrative spread, then you reduce the likelihood of your own vote, I think. Why would you bother voting if all politicians are the same? So I've sent out the request for young voters to tell me what they want, what they care about, what they feel about the current offers before them on the table. 03456060973. How would we, as older listeners, or indeed presenters, how would we persuade that not necessarily young member of the electorate that it is worth voting? Tell me, let's pretend I can't be bothered to vote. I've got better things to do. I think all politicians are the same. They're all liars. They've all got their noses in the trough. They're all in it for themselves. They're all incompetent. They're all ridiculous. None of them will talk about the stuff that really matters. And then you insert the stuff that you think really matters. Why would I bother voting? Why would I bother voting? The offer to young people is quite starkly different, isn't it? The Tories are going to sign you up for national service, and the Labour Party at the moment are going to give you the vote when you're 16. But does that land? Does that matter? That's what I want. I want those two things. Number one, engaged young people, listening to younger people, listening to this programme. What is the stuff that matters and why? And then inevitably, what do you feel about the offers on the table in front of you? But then for everybody else, whatever age you are and whoever it is you're addressing, how do you persuade somebody that it's important to vote, that it's worth voting? What is it? Because you can, I think, get quite downcast by the state of our democracy. You can see it as essentially moribund. I mean, the world has changed a lot since 2010, just as it changed a lot in 1997, or began to change a lot in 1997, and it began to change a lot in 1979. But you could be forgiven for thinking that, well, there's not been, apart from a kind of, what you call it, Liz Truss type catastrophe, it doesn't make that much difference to my life. And yet, of course, it does. So how do you persuade people of that? How do you even remind people, perhaps, of the importance of their vote? Why all politicians are not the same. Phone lines are wide open. You might struggle to get through, actually, but I'm sure that some vacancies will present themselves imminently on 0345 6060973. Thank you to everybody who has got in touch to say that they weren't politically engaged, particularly when they stumbled across this programme, but they are now. But thank you particularly to Jez, who's written, James, I have been accidentally listening to this programme for the last 3 years. It's this damn radio. I still haven't worked out how to change station. I got in a car once. I got in a minicab once, and it was being driven by a bloke whose radio was stuck on LBC. I said, oh, that's nice. You listen to LBC. And he obviously didn't know who I was. And he said, I can't change it. It's an old radio, and it's completely stuck on LBC. I don't know what happened to him, but I doubt it was pretty.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12 is the time. Gen Z will vote, but they're not excited about it. And that, I think, is because the stuff they care about is not necessarily the stuff that the politicians have propelled front and centre. And on a similar theme, Saatchi and Saatchi launching a big campaign to encourage young people to vote. Just Vote posters will be erected across the country, including Glastonbury, and there'll be a big online campaign. So persuade someone that they should, or tell me what it is that you, as a younger voter, care most about, and then we move inevitably, don't we, into the question of whether or not the major parties are making you an offer you can't refuse. Zara is in Worcester. Zara, what would you like to say?
Hi, I've just moved off from my postgrad at Worcester University. I've just done teaching in FE, and I've had a placement in Worcester. So I'm 21. I really went through all of education and just went straight through it. But now I'm currently teaching at a sixth form college.
You can teach 18-year-olds when you're 21?
Yeah.
Good grief. I had no idea.
I know. It's pretty unconventional, but I really enjoy it. But
good for you.
Just go. Yes. Thank you. Recently I've moved out just this week, and there's so many issues that come up in teaching, and just seeing 16 to 18-year-olds and having just gone through it, I can just see how difficult it's going to be for them to either get on the housing market, to be able to get a flat even, which is why I've always been kind of tuned into politics, but I'm probably going to vote Labour because it's...
Go on, sorry. No, you carry on.
Just because it's there's not great options, but at least there's something there. Like voices like Zara Sultana's is kind of the reason I want to get Labour in, just so those working class voices are actually heard.
What So, because of course there was an advertising campaign before you were born, I think, where it featured people saying that they weren't interested in politics, and then it was you've just done it brilliantly. It was pointed out that everything is politics, and you just picked on housing. But so young people probably don't feel, the people you're teaching, I'm not really going to let it pass that you're coming on as a 21-year-old, as an expert on what young people think because you teach them rather than because you are one. But we'll let that slide. Do you think that some of the people you're talking about maybe don't realise that their access to property ownership, their access to housing could depend on who's in Downing Street, could depend on who's in government?
Yeah, I would agree. So, just 16 to 18-year-olds at the minute, they're very just kind of focused on day by day. They don't really see the wider picture. I think I was quite lucky when I was 16 and kind of knew I had that path I was going into, and I wanted to go into photography and teaching. I was lucky in that aspect. But watching 16-year-olds today, they really don't know. Like, even when they go to a careers fair, they're not sure what path to take, and they're really they're not aware of the politics around their futures and where they can go forward with it. So having to talk to them and giving them my experience, having just come out of education myself, I'm still in it. I'm trying to lead them to pathways that are, one, financially viable for them, and two, that they will actually be able to get success out of them. And they really have no clue what's beyond a sixth form.
And that means they won't. Unless they're lucky enough to enjoy your ministrations, they're unlikely to have much clue when they hit 18, when they're moving out of sixth form as well, when they will have a vote. I think that's probably true. What we neither of us know, Zara, is whether it's more or less true now than it was 10 or 20 or 40 years ago, whether or not it was always the case. But I know, of course, there's lots of 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds who aren't particularly engaged either. Thank you, Zara. Good luck. I'm sorry for sounding so old. Well, I'm pretty sure it's a bit special for a 21-year-old to be teaching 18-year-olds. It certainly didn't come across it in my day, but fantastic that you're doing it. Seb's in Sevenoaks. Seb, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm good. I am 20, nearly 21 years old, and actually this is my second time calling into your show on LBC.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. I was just going to say that I am someone who's been politically minded always for a very long time, and my politics, and that is really not always a good thing, because it does make you feel more depressed about the state of things and how the decline has been going on for 14 long years, and my politics are definitely on the left wing, and I'm always speaking to people my age who, to their credit, are perhaps a bit more tuned in than I'd say other people around the country, because I go to university in Brighton, I go to the University of Sussex, and lots of my friends, do feel the Tory fatigue that we've had since 2010, and, are...
No, that's all fine. I understand what you're saying. So what are the things you care most about, as it were?
So my biggest priorities are climate change and investing in renewable energies, and having essentially a green revolution of this country's infrastructures, because the way it's currently going, with Sunak absolutely repealing the
he's still committed to net zero, but there's a story today about Rees-Mogg and Liz Truss encouraging him to abandon net zero completely as part of the sort of electoral process.
This is just it. And then when Liz Truss was actually PM, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't know if you remember briefly, and it was for like 2 days, wanted to push solar farms, but Liz Truss herself was against it.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, no, it was October and her short window. But my
but that's very common for your generation, I think. Climate change and in general, and sustainable energy, net zero in particular, they are huge. I think the more you spread it over generation, the more likely that is to be at the top of a list of priorities. The further down you go, the age range.
Absolutely, and I would love to be able to vote at my university accommodation come July 4th, which is Brighton Pavilion, which is the only green.
Yeah, careful now. You're going in very. You're giving me peur de paranoia, which is the third time today. The first 2 times have been unnecessary purder paranoia, but we have to be very careful going into constituency specific. So park that, if you would, Seb. You can get a full list of candidates in Brighton Pavilion. Not on the internet. And tell me instead one other big thing for you, one other big area of engagement.
Well, the other big area of engagement is welfare and just increasing the welfare state, because I have to vote tactically. I'm not going to say any more than that.
No, you're not.
No, don't worry. I'm not dicing with death here. But it's the increasing welfare and child benefit cap. Like that for me, I think it's a shame that the Labour Party, in my personal opinion, Starmer isn't willing to go back on that decision.
Ruthless caution again. Ruthless caution, because it strikes you as obviously compassionate and politically probably necessary, but his fear of getting monstered by the usual suspects is where the caution comes in, and his determination not to is where the ruthlessness has come in, up to and include, because even Suella Braverman, believe it or not, has called for an abolition on the two-child benefit cap.
I wouldn't have believed my eyes if I'd seen it.
No, no, nor could I. I mean, that's why I'm pretty sure it's possible I dreamt it or had some sort of accidentally ate some mushrooms in the Peak District and hallucinated the whole thing, but I don't think I did. So two things there, neither of which the two main parties are necessarily offering to you, which is why you flirted with the idea of going into forensic detail about your choices in a very specific constituency. But I'm glad that you didn't. So, yeah, I mean, some people listening, some older people listening will be of the view that you might change your opinion on growing the welfare state when you move further into the world of tax paying, but there's plenty of us who do pay tax who agree with you. So I don't know that it's fair sometimes to suggest that being young makes you a little bit more idealistic about what society can look like. Maybe the young people are the most honest. 26 after 12 is the time. Tom's in Upminster. Tom, what do you think?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. It's my first time calling into a radio station ever, so slightly nervous.
Fantastic.
But I
you never tried to win tickets for the summertime ball on Capital or anything like that.
Absolutely, I didn't.
This is how I talk to young people, Tom.
But anyway, yeah, thanks for having me on. I think that I had to call in because when you were mentioning exactly the topic we're talking about now, it was pretty much word for word the conversation I was having with my friends in the pub last Friday.
Wow.
Where we were sat there as a group of 7 or 8 of us, all from quite similar backgrounds, but doing lots of different things in work. And it was funny how mixed everyone's reaction to the general election was. Yeah. I'm someone that's quite invested in politics and have been interested in A-level, did journalism, and all that kind of thing. I've got friends that are in the police. I've got friends that are in the NHS, in teachers as well, that actually won't be voting because they don't see a party that really represents them or can provide anything for them.
What are they looking for, do you think?
I think the key, I think, I mean, this isn't necessarily to speak for them, but I think the key is we've come through such a polarizing kind of period of time with Brexit and all the stuff that's going on in America, that politics was seen as very kind of loud and entertaining and kind of scary, instead of being like results driven. I think that's probably the biggest thing for me. So it's one of those where I think the stuff that they care about. So like your first caller alluded to, the getting on the property ladder, all that kind of thing.
And you're seeing politicians, I mean, whether this is a fair analysis or not, but you're seeing more about culture wars and toilets.
Yeah, exactly right. I think
today's news, you literally are, actually.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think also it's a case of young people are kind of seen as somebody or a group that you have to just win over, as opposed to actually provide for. Like this whole thing of like national services. Oh, has Rishi done that?
How did that go down on Friday night? How did that go down on Friday night?
Well, it was a laughing stock. Everyone just joked about what they would do if we got called up and that kind of thing. It's terrible, really. But ultimately, that's the main offering of
Did you see the footage of Jack Grealish with one of those confetti guns? Have you seen that?
I did see it.
Yeah, that was my favourite contribution to the debate. Someone just posted, "This will be me if we have national service," and it's Jack Grealish accidentally setting a confetti gun off in his own face. I love that. I mean, that made me feel young again, actually. Would that idea that I touched on a moment ago hold among your peer group? That all politicians are the same? Not like if you dig into it, but that perhaps explains some of the lethargy that you describe.
I think exactly right. Yeah, I think that there isn't really a kind of pure representative from any of the parties that are currently out there.
And that's something they need to address, because I if I'd been in the pub, well, first of all, I wouldn't have been rude enough to come over and join in your conversation, obviously, but I passionately believe that's not true. But I'm 52, so some of the things that are measurable, the results, affect me very directly. The younger you are, the more you're approaching politics from a sort of ideological or theoretical position, and you can't really turn on your telly without hearing someone talking about immigration or toilets, and you're sitting there thinking, well, these are not things that matter to me. And it's probably true across a lot of that generation. This isn't me being silly, all right? A list of the candidates, a full list of the candidates in Brighton Pavilion, the constituency just mentioned by Seb in Sevenoaks, are available on lbc.co.uk/candidates. Does anyone else? I'm just chatting to my colleagues now. You talk among yourselves for a minute. Does anyone else have purdah paranoia? Or is it just me? Do you have it? Do other presenters have it? They should have it. It's better to be paranoid, right? Because they are coming to get us. It's not even paranoia. They are coming to get us, aren't they? Sort of, if we make a mistake. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 12. A moment, if I may, to talk about Rob Burrow, the rugby league star and latterly motor neurone disease campaigner. He fought the disease for about nearly the last 5 years of his life. His wife Lindsay and his three children, of course, will be mourning his passing today. His death was announced yesterday. But I told you that I happen to know for a fact that Rob would have appreciated this angle. And I asked you how on earth I was going to bring the favourite subject of this programme, Brexit, into marking the passing of Rob Burrow. And I'm going to tell you now that I got a message off Rob not long ago, and I'd forgotten about it until I just checked my correspondence last night when the news broke. And he told me, I'm going to read it to you because it's a lovely thing that he wrote. This is going back to January of 2020. And for reasons that I won't go into, Rob got in touch with me to say thank you for something. And he said he knows the show. He says, I learned more listening to you than I did in my entire time at school. Although I must admit, he says, I'm a die-hard Brexiter. Please don't hate me. Listening to your debates always makes me second think my decisions. And we stayed in touch throughout. He came on the programme, I don't know if you remember, in April of 2020, and Lindsay came on more recently. And we got back in touch a few months later. I replied to a message that he sent me. I said, absolute pleasure, Rob. Let me know if I can do anything else. And then I added, now, about that Brexit business, because I thought now's the time for me to start having a dialogue with him about that Brexit vote that he cast in 2016. And here's what he wrote, and this is what just broke me last night completely. He just replied, if I'm alive 10 years from now, then we'll have that chat. Thanks again. And of course, he won't be. And he will leave enormous holes in many, many, many lives, mostly, of course, Lindsay and the children's. Some of his former colleagues, I think, sort of most obviously Kevin Sinfield, but also Stevie Ward, are going to be feeling a lot more broken today than the rest of us. Leeds Rhinos fans, especially rugby league fans in general. Rugby league, I think, not uniquely, but it is for people who perhaps get most of their sporting fix from football. He's a rare figure of someone whose respect among opposing fans was off the charts. 1982 to 2024. I said it before, and I will in conclusion say it again, that we use words like legacy and legend all the time in this business, but sometimes they are barely adequate to describe somebody who has just passed away, and I think that is very, very, very much the case with Rob Burrow. 12:37 is the time. Back to young people and voting, or indeed to the defusing. Well, hey, I'm saying this is something that needs to be defused. You might say it doesn't need to be defused because it's true. But the idea that all politicians are the same drives a form of lethargy that is dangerous because they're not all the same. I look at America. Imagine if someone said, I can't choose between Joe Biden and the convicted felon and adjudicated rapist Donald Trump. But there are, or there are people who say, do you know what? I prefer the convicted felon and adjudicated rapist Donald Trump. So if you allow the idea to take hold that they're all as bad as each other, really bad stuff can happen. Max is in Sheffield. Max, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, Max. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm just finishing off some revision for my university finals this week.
No, you're not, mate. You're on the radio. Completely ducking your university revision for your finals later this week.
Yeah, probably trying to dodge it a little bit, to be honest. I was going to touch on sort of a bit of voting intention. I sort of hark back to a trip that me and my mates had to the pub the other week.
Oh, yeah.
So about 8 of us, and 7 of us are fairly... we're all from very different backgrounds, as you sort of get at university. We're all fairly central and have very similar politics. And I have one friend who is significantly more right-wing than the rest of us.
Okay. Do you know why?
Well, I'll get onto it.
Okay.
So the thing is, we were talking about who we're going to vote for in the next election, and he says, I'm probably going to vote Conservative. So we sort of start to probe into it a little bit. And what we realise is, he doesn't actually have any sort of motivation for voting Conservative other than the fact that he's from a Conservative area, right?
Yeah.
And we're sort of thinking about it, and we're saying, so actually on your point of not all politicians are the same, we're thinking, why may someone vote for a Conservative councillor? Sorry, not a councillor, an MP.
Candidate, yeah.
And so we're thinking about this, and we sort of came to the conclusion that the only real justification that you can have is if you've got a fantastic local MP, which you do get, because there are genuinely some fantastic Tory MPs that do a good job. Unfortunately, they've been thinned out by Boris Johnson, Brexit, and the terrible running of the Conservative Party. But there's still a few that remain.
Yes.
And we think that's largely the only justification. So we ask him, so who's your local MP? And as you maybe guess, he wasn't able to answer the actual name of the MP. Yeah.
But I don't think, unless I've missed your point, I wouldn't be surprised to have that same experience with a 55-year-old or a 60-year-old.
Well, what I was going to get onto was because we reckon that largely his political views are determined by those of his parents.
Yes.
So the people that don't actually take the time to go research into their things themselves will be led by their parents or what they hear on the closest news media. I think that can be really toxic for young voters who maybe they're not as active when they go out looking for information. They won't take the time to listen to LBC or the radio.
Again, there'll be plenty of older voters who don't either. What would be the things he cared most about, just out of interest? And then I'll ask you the same question. So, because he's in a minority. For the age group of 18 to 24, I think he's in a minority of 8% of the electorate, which is an extraordinary figure. It's an existential figure for British politics, let alone whatever party it is you prefer. But if you said to him, what matters? What's the stuff that matters? What would he say?
Well, we did ask him this, and he said his first thing he said was immigration.
Yeah, there we go.
Shockingly.
Yeah.
And so I do economics, and I'm very central, and I try to explain to him that if you look at it from a very impartial point of view, the whole country, the UK, is built on the back of immigrants and immigration. The NHS is collapsing because we're mainly because of Brexit and because we had so many talented staff leave back to the EU.
But it's an intoxicating drug, isn't it? That idea we need fewer foreigners, and today Keir Starmer is calling for less immigration, and business groups and one of the unions that gives Labour the most support are queuing up to tell him how badly Britain needs foreign workers. So, it's not just your mate that is caught up in this trap, is it?
Well, I find it really interesting because I saw an article today, and it was about why people aren't talking about Brexit.
Yeah.
And I really think that Brexit is probably. I had to write a whole paper on it in my second year.
I had to write a whole book, mate. I win.
I'm sure yours is probably better than mine.
I very much doubt it. Yeah. So you think? Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you sort of, if you've got this absolutely enormous thing that is relevant to almost everything that's going on, and nobody is talking about it, then that is going to be that's going to catalyse detachment. That's going to cause even more confusion and lethargy, because it's like having a conversation about football without acknowledging the existence of the offside rule.
Yeah, it's like the elephant in the room that everyone refuses to acknowledge.
Yeah.
And it really has sort of seeped into every part of
course it has.
life.
Well, you know that because you've studied it.
Yeah, and it just, well, mine was a lot more of like econometrics, looking at where the country would be had we remained, and obviously completely stark contrast.
Sound like Goldman Sachs now. Not that Rishi Sunak would pay any attention at all to the analysis undertaken by his former employer. Briefly, Max, what matters most to you then? And you know, Brexit can be relevant to your answer, but it can't. Maybe getting back into the European Union is your answer. But you tell me, what are the things that you're most looking for from politicians?
Well, I think one of them is, well, I can't vote for Conservatives just because of the amount of damage they've done to this country. And, you know, I would tend to vote for the best party in front of me, but, you know, they've lurched from one crisis to another. They've first started with Brexit, then it went to Boris Johnson and Partygate, when we were all at home revising for our A-levels, and he was partying in Downing Street. Yeah. And then they elected Liz Truss, who destroyed the economy, and then they denied she destroyed the economy.
Yeah.
And so there's already that historical sort of, they'd already lost me by Partygate.
Right.
I was already gone completely. But then in terms of going forward, my future, I think the most important, and a lot of the callers have already mentioned, is the housing crisis.
Yeah, first thing they need to do. NHS and housing, day one. Yeah,
those NHS, housing and climate change.
What's your degree? Economics?
Yeah.
Because I'm helping one of my children revise for A-levels at the moment, and the 51 to 64 period of Tory dominance is actually fascinating. They built 1.3 million houses during that period, starting with Churchill. So it can be done, and it can be done by Conservatives, but for reasons that you've articulated very well, you're less likely to give them the benefit of the doubt after recent experiences. Speaking of recent experiences, here is... Oh, actually, let's do a true or false on this. Who do you think said this in the run-up to the referendum that Max was just referring to as being the root, or indeed the exacerbator of many of the problems that the country currently faces? Just listen to this. It's quite long. You'll benefit from better care from the NHS thanks to the reallocation of funds from the EU budget. Controlled immigration will lead to reduced waiting times for you and your loved ones. The excess funding that would otherwise be sent to Brussels could also be directed to education, meaning better prospects for your children. Your wages will rise thanks to better controlled immigration, which will lead to less competition for jobs. Your weekly food shop will become cheaper. Food prices will no longer be inflated by agricultural policies controlled by the EU. You and your family will benefit from a resurgent economy led by new and flourishing small businesses, following the removal of burdensome EU regulations and red tape. With less pressure on housing, younger generations will also find it easier to get on the housing ladder. Remember, this is 8 years ago. Politicians, both local and national, will become more accountable, helping to strengthen your community and others, especially those most damaged by EU policies like farming, fishing, and industries like steel. Because when that was written, we had an industry like steel. A more prosperous and safer future awaits us outside the EU. A vote to leave is a vote for a brighter future for you, your family, and your community. That did happen in 2016. And if, as Natasha Clark suggested earlier, Nigel Farage is about to stand again for Parliament, then hopefully somebody will be asking him about why none of those promises from one of his party political broadcasts in 2016 has come true.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. Gen Z will vote, but they're not excited about it. And what was the Saatchi & Saatchi ads target young? Dale Vince put £1 million into a campaign designed solely to encourage young people to vote. A third, according to this research, are not even registered. It is. Is there still time? There must still be time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this campaign, would they? So I can say this without any fear of breaching rules or broadcast regulations. Look at their faces. I love doing this. I can say I'm supremely confident I can say this. Do register to vote. Could you hear that sigh of relief coming from the production? Yeah, I mean, I'm in a soundproof room, so it's unlikely, but I mean, not impossible. 10 to 1 is the time. Rebecca is in Enfield. Rebecca, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's the first time I've ever called a radio show ever, so I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah, you make it sound like it was previously beneath you or something, Rebecca. No, I've been sitting here waiting for years. Welcome aboard.
Hi. So I'm 25 and I'm in university, and I've got a lot of friends that are younger than me.
Yeah.
And their kind of view on voting is what you've been saying a lot, that a lot of young people think is that all politicians are the same.
Yeah.
So what's the point? Or like nothing's going to change, so what's the point? And or your vote doesn't matter because one vote isn't important. That's the kind of view a lot of people have.
I can see why.
And I fundamentally disagree with that. I think.
Why? What is it? Why do you see the world differently, do you think?
Oh, so I grew up in South Africa.
Oh, well, that's a fairly comprehensive answer to that question.
Yeah. So and I am black, so I couldn't. People who look like me couldn't vote 30 years ago in South Africa. And so my view on politics has always been be aware. I'm not deep in, but it's like be aware, because if you don't exercise your right to vote, you're likely to lose it. Is kind of how how I think.
Yes.
So when I get kind of frustrated, so I've got a friend who's about 21, and she's obviously grown up entirely with the Conservatives as her leading government, and even though they say they don't hate young people, it's just very hard not to think they have like a genuine dislike for them.
Yes.
It's a constant kind of, okay, they don't really acknowledge that they have opinions, or like even Brexit, even though that's not a big part. It is a big part because the whole kind of functioning of the UK changed because of it. But there's no like acknowledgement of like what it would mean for people who will actually be affected by the decisions that they're making, or like only wanting the older kind of going for the older vote, and not thinking that in 20 or 30 years the people you need to vote for you are not going to vote for you if you've been like basically
if they
beating them
look
for, like,
back on their national service, for example, and think, how dare you? I'd never forgive you for this.
It's just, and because I was talking to her about national service, because I heard it and I was like, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, well, and I can see a version of it that would make sense, but that's not the version that's being made reality, because like a lot of young people work on weekends, or are, they need it to work to survive, because the cost of living crisis is not going away. So they need to work to survive.
So I have some sympathy for your friend though. So 7 when Cameron got in, or thereabouts.
She's born in 2004, I think.
Oh yeah, so 6 or 7,
yeah.
6 or 7 in 2010 when Cameron got in, and Labour has been in a bit of a mess over that period, over some of that period. Certainly the older she got, the messier it became.
Yeah.
And it hasn't felt like there was, I bet it was different in 97. I bet people voting in 97 felt that they were voting for meaningful change.
Yeah.
But Starmer hasn't created a sense of meaningful change, has he, yet?
It just kind of feels like he's so... he wants to get the vote so badly. He's not willing to stand for anything.
We're calling it ruthless caution today, Rebecca. It's a good phrase, though, right? It's a good phrase.
Ruthless caution is quite good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, say something, or like have some sort of opinion. It's very like robotic, because I don't understand how you seem like you don't really care. And he must care, because I don't think you get this far without caring.
Well, for sure. I guess could your friend's needle be nudged by a manifesto? I mean, you could come out with a proper offer.
I don't think it'll be a manifesto would do it. I think I don't know.
She needs to see things happen. She needs to see results.
And even though I don't believe all politicians are the same, at this point, it's all very like... They're all kind of very reactionary and almost childish. They're kind of all poking at each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, for God's sake, come on. Like, we're not... Like,
we'll do that. We can do that on Twitter. You shouldn't be doing it yourselves.
Your job is not to, like, have banter or be funny. Like, I don't really care if you're funny, if you're, like, good at your job. Like, I'm just...
25 years old, and I think you've just schooled pretty much the entire communications departments of both major parties. Banter is not. We don't want banter. We don't want flipping. I mean, the Labour game has probably been better than the Tory game, but they are both childish.
Say that, but they're on TikTok, because I'm on TikTok, and the Labour TikTok page is just like poking fun at the Tories the whole time, and it's not really much policy. So I'm like,
my 17-year-old correspondent who joined the programme today for 48 hours was referring me to TikTok earlier.
It's funny, like I get it's funny, but like I don't need you to be funny. I need you to tell me if I can afford.
It's quite patronising, isn't it? Actually, here's some banter for you. Forget about your property problems.
That, because I'm young, I can't see the actual problems. Like, you think that the way to get me to vote for you is to do like a funny dance or have like funny edits? Because that's not really. That doesn't because anybody could be funny. Like, TikTok is full of funny things.
Yeah.
So but it's not. Doesn't seem to be full of
So that is adding to the problem.
Who have sort of
principles,
your principles,
plans,
plan.
Ideas. I mean, Tom earlier caller talked about results-driven politics, which seems for your generation you've never seen it really.
Everybody kind of has become the Americans are with all he's stupid or he's old or sleepy or all that nonsense. I don't really care if you're sleepy or you've got issues, but can you do your job?
Yeah.
Can you make my life better? Can you make?
They're not getting that. That's absolutely brilliant. I can't believe this was your first time. You're an absolute natural.
Oh, thank you.
And there it is. So I mean, you kind of hinted at it already, but briefly, what are the things you would want to be front and centre from on the table?
So NHS is a big thing.
Yeah.
Okay, just housing, obviously, because everybody would like to have their own home one day.
Mm.
And then also a big thing for me is universal credit as a whole, as a way to help people find jobs, create more systems so people can find jobs that they can do, or I don't even know how to explain it.
I understand.
I just want
to turn the system back round into a job finding service rather than an unemployment punishment project.
Exactly, because it makes you feel because I started university late. I did a couple. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I worked for a while, and so I was on job seekers for a little bit.
Right.
And the way you feel is wow. I feel like I can't even speak about anything. I just feel so small. But nobody's really helping you to
That's an ideological fix, isn't it? That's the approach that they take, and I'm not surprised to hear that was your experience, given the rhetoric that comes out of the mouths of the people responsible for the changes to the welfare state and the introduction of universal credit in particular. Rebecca, thank you. Brilliant. Do you know, my own producer said, I can't believe you've got so many young people ringing in. I said, what do you mean? You're my producer. You're not supposed to be surprised at the diversity of my demographics. It's what we do. It's why we come to work every day. Oliver's in Stafford. I've only got a minute. Oliver, make it sing.
Hello, mate. I'll make it very quick for you. I'll say I'm a big fan of you.
That's all right. I'm going to take a little more.
In my circles, it seems to me that what my friends are telling me, and I believe this as well.
Go on.
In my job, I go into loads of different hospitals. I'm seeing how bad it is. Seeing all my mates busting their butts, working 70 hours a week. And then you tune into PMQs or whatever, and it's just a big joke.
Yeah. So you've got that all politicians, they're all as bad as each other syndrome.
Yeah.
How do they break that? How do they change that?
There are some good ones,
That's what they got to do. Just get them out there, get them front and centre, get them in front of the young people, and show them that they're not all the same. That some of them are better.
Yeah,
I wish we had longer. Next time, get on earlier, Oliver. All right, get up earlier. No, I can't do those sort of lazy cliches about young people. I've done more than enough. Thank you for that. I was also quite gratified by the ease with which we found an unending queue of young people. We may do that again. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4, but now, of course, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.